man. I am not a master of journalism. I am not Walter Cronkite or Larry King. I'm literally a dude sitting in his room who talks to a camera all day to express my feelings and thoughts on the news. And it's kind of just an addiction of me seeing stories like, whoa, I got to talk about this.
Welcome back to Posting Through It. Thanks for joining us another week. I'm Jared.
I'm Mike.
I'm Bob.
And this episode is all about Tim Pool. A lot of things have happened recently, but maybe you heard Trump on March 28th respond to this guy who wished him a happy Women's Day and asked him what a woman is.
Yeah, I wanted to say, first of all, happy Women's Month. You do so much for women by, first of all, keeping men out of women's sports, and you platform so many...
That was an easy one. That was easy.
You platform so many great women, like your Chief of Staff, Susie Wiles. You also have Caroline Levitt doing a great job as press secretary. Now Alina will be joining as well. Since Democrats seem to struggle answering this question, I wanted to ask you, what is a woman, and why is it important that we understand the difference between men and women?
Well, it's sort of easy to answer for me, because a woman is somebody that can have a baby under certain circumstances.
Elad Eliyahu asked the question, and he was invited as part of the White House press pool in his capacity as an employee of Timcast Media. What is Timcast Media? It is the media empire, if you can call doing YouTube shows, complaining about how white people can't blast the N-word, as part of an empire of a man named Tim Pool. If you don't watch right-wing YouTube content, but have been on X or Twitter over the last decade, you probably know Tim Pool is the guy who is always wearing a beanie. That's a winter cap all the time. And while wearing that cap, he dishes out MAGA-friendly commentary about the news of the day.
Starting with a webcam and a microphone, Tim Pool has become a bona fide MAGA starlet on social media. Last year, he spoke with Donald Trump on the campaign trail in an exclusive interview. Lawmakers periodically go out to his West Virginia home/media compound to appear on his podcast. He speaks at major conservative events, like those put on Turning Point USA, a flagship right-wing youth organization. He appears in right-wing media, from Glenn Beck's radio show to Fox News, as a left-of-center voice who just so happens to say everything a MAGA pundit would.
But Tim didn't start out as a MAGA commentator, and he didn't start out as the head of a media company invited to the White House by the Trump administration. That's why we have set out to figure out who the hell
is Tim Pool?
Break free from control reality and find your way from this, to get away from it. I'm losing my mind.
Okay, so with us today is a friend and a friend of the podcast, Robert Silverman. I'm calling him Bob because he's my friend. He is a fantastic feature writer, one of the best I know, and he has done all of the important reporting on Tim Pool, which is like kind of a tough thing to live with. I feel like it's as an accomplishment. It's just like
it's an incredible black mark. It is a shame that I will have to spend the rest of my life living down. If there's a scarlet beanie that could be stitched directly onto my flesh, I would take that hit.
I feel pretty bad sometimes being like, wow, I'm the guy who delivered the most Jack Posobiec reporting. But I look at this and I'm like, man, you wrote the book on Tim Pool. I don't know. That could be worse. I just wanted to highlight that, like, I don't know what percentage, but I'm going to guess like at least like 75% of the reporting that backs this podcast is going to be from Bob and the work that he's done exposing Pool at a time when nobody really wanted to touch Pool. And I should say that part of the reason they don't want to touch Pool is because he is kind of an uncomfortable figure to look at, right? Who he appeals to, his style is awkward, and it really cuts against everything that the mainstream media really wants to look at. Unfortunately for them, he is very, very influential. So getting right to it, Tim is born in Chicago in 1986, and his family is mixed Korean. And by that, we mean specifically his maternal grandmother is Korean. And this is important sort of because Tim really starts to play up later in his life this idea that he's not white. And he sometimes will talk about things like makes reference to rooftop Koreans. These were the folks who armed themselves during the LA riots in 1992, and sort of like pointed their guns at rioters and things like that to defend their shops. And he says, I can make jokes about that because I'm Korean. He will later also repeatedly use it as a way of deflecting against criticism that he is racist.
Put somebody else in there, they're looking at you funny. You're good. You go to the airport, they're not pulling you over because they
No. That's bullshit.
They pull you over
because
you look like what?
Yes,
look like
motherfucker.
What do you look like?
I get randomly flagged every fucking time I go to the airport. See,
and he's he's from a part of Chicago that also comes up, right, Jared? Like he starts to talk about Chicago here and there, and it's a place you know something about.
Tim likes to trot out that he's from Chicago. If you hear him talk about it, he grew up on the South Side, stepping over vials of crack and dodging bullets. And, it was gangland. A lot of profiles about Tim that you read in the media will say he's from Chicago. Some of them will say, oh, yeah, he's from like South Chicago or the Southwest side of Chicago. But I live in Chicago, and this is a beautiful city, and it's a city of neighborhoods. So, like, where in Chicago he lived can tell us a lot about whether or not his characterizations of that are plausible. As I was looking into this, Tim had posted a electoral shift map by the Chicago Sun-Times and circled the spot on the map where he's like, that's my neighborhood. See, it skewed towards Trump this election. And I said, all right, sick. This is like Bridgeview, West Lawn, really. It's out by the Midway Airport. It is about as far southwest as you can go in Chicago before you're not in Chicago anymore. When he talks about growing up on the south side of the city, I think that evokes a different mental image, especially on his listener base, than I would ascribe to Bridgeview or that area. Now, this became like a point of debate a few years ago. Somebody from the Young Turks, or I think associated with that world, went on his show. And when Tim was like, I grew up in Chicago, I saw gang violence and stuff, was basically just like, what are you talking about, dude? So he brought his sister onto like a special response video that he made for them. They told the story about their family being targeted by white supremacists. I mean, like, that could be true, all right? And he grew up in Chicago in the 90s. So I do have to like give a little bit of caveat. The 90s was like peak gang violence in Chicago. That area did not see a ton of it. Studies of Chicago crime over decades have shown that's not really like the epicenter of it. I wouldn't say he's far from it, maybe like a couple miles from it. It's possible when roaming around as a kid, he like encountered some of this stuff. But I do think his characterization of like the area he grew up in doesn't really match reality. Like this weaving, whether it's his background or the place he grew up in, into making this sort of mythology for himself, there's just a lot of reasons to think that maybe he's overplaying his hand a bit.
What's key to kind of like take away from this, and we can move on, is just more that he has this little bit of a hook with Chicago. And he also has his maternal grandmother being Korean. And he sort of paints this picture of himself that is a little bit more exotic and rough and tumble than may actually be the case. And again, very important as a shield when he starts to become more radically far right. So he drops out of school around the age of 14. And it is the beginnings of the Bush era, then the start of the sort of modern culture wars that come after 9/11 are happening. And I just want to give a quick bit of tech history here, which I had to look up myself. So the first live stream happens in when a Palo Alto band called Severe Tire Damage. I listened to them. They were not my cup of tea. Did a set on an early internet platform called Mbone Technology. And then live stream starts to grow through the years. Bill Clinton hosts a live stream in 1999. It's like the first time a president is involved in one. And then we have in 2005, YouTube is formed. for the first time and as a company. And they shortly thereafter wheel out YouTube Live, which is their live streaming platform. And this comes long before platforms like, say, Periscope, on Twitter and things like that. So 2011, I remember this well because I probably watched some of the live streams that were involved here from India, because I was living in India from 2010 to 2015. And at the time, I think I was working at GQ India, and it was happening, the stuff that was happening at night, I would watch during the day. And that would be the encampment down at Zuccotti Park, otherwise known as Occupy Wall Street. Occupy Wall Street is a kind of a movement that happens, I think, suddenly kind of grabs this culture really by the throat. People had not been talking at all about economic wealth disparity. And then all of a sudden, in the aftermath of the Great Recession, which Obama kind of walks into at the start of his term, it becomes a very big national issue. So they build this the leftists build this encampment. Well, we're going to get into whether they're all leftists and not in a second. But they build this encampment down near Wall Street in Zuccotti Park, which is, Bob, how would you describe Zuccotti Park, as a fellow New Yorker?
I think you could call it a relatively small patch of green surrounded by the lords of capitalism, so that the various quarter zip fleece wearers have a little bit of greenery to walk in between their various rapacious acts.
Yes, there's like... You could live in New York your entire life and without Occupy Wall Street never have thought of Zuccotti Park the entire time.
It is not a park where people normally go to congregate. It was sort of a tossed off concession by some city planner to make sure that not every single square foot of concrete downtown was just that.
Yeah, it becomes like a really important flashpoint in the culture wars, and sort of sparks the evolution of a lot of things, including Bernie's 2016 campaign. I think you could argue really came from the energy around Occupy Wall Street, and also to some degree Trump's campaign. Not entirely, but somewhat. And we know that because there's a whole bunch of people who are down there who are sort of involved in Occupy Wall Street to some degree or the other, including the neo-Nazis involved with the Daily Stormer. Tim Pool is not connected with them at this time, but they're down there. Cassandra Fairbanks, who has come up on the show before. She's kind of this. She eventually becomes a collaborator of Tim Pool. We can get into her later. So is Luke Rudkowski. And what exactly, Bob, would you describe as Tim Pool's role in Occupy Wall Street? What does he do, and what's his shtick?
Okay, just to give it a little clarification. I mean, I can't believe that was 15 years ago, but it was 15 years ago. Yeah. It was coming off of for a lot of young people who were still in the midst of the Great Recession. And in the early years of the Obama presidency, there was so much hope built up with Obama's election for so many people who voted for him that he was going to affect real change. And the first thing that Obama did was to bail out the bankers and screw over all the mortgage lenders who were losing all their houses. And that was the basic impetus behind it, which is that we elected what we thought was a progressive president. Ha ha. Ha 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 ha. And what happened was pretty much the same centrist Dem policymaking that has been the law of the land since Jimmy Carter was in office. Right. And so there was a great deal of resentment about that. There were, people were struggling to find employment for people with more means. They found that their 401ks were suddenly shrinking down to the size of a small liquid-filled nubbin. People today may recognize that sentiment. And there was a belief that, well, if we actually want politicians to do things that they said they were going to do, we have to actually put up a show of force. We have to make it clear that these are the things that we, the people, voted for. And Occupy Wall Street became a way to focus that intensity and to say, actually, you have to do what you said. Pay attention to us. Right. There are a lot of reasons why the movement itself, Occupy, dissipated, and whether the lack of actual concrete demands was a detriment and the lack of organized structure is a whole other conversation. But Tim and a lot of young people, I think, were drawn down to Occupy simply because it was a focal point for the resentment that they felt but couldn't name or articulate in a clear way. So the reason it drew people like neo-Nazis, like Luke Rudkowski, who has been vaguely affiliated with the militia movement for going on a decade and has been an Alex Jones hanger-on, I guess you might say, for the 5 years after that, and a 9/11 truther, and a Ron Paul devotee. A lot of those same people, the Paulistas, were also coming down there. There was this sort of libertarian coterie who felt that same degree of frustration with the way the government was working. So while it was, as a whole, a leftist protest movement, it attracted people from across the political spectrum. Tim, at that time, was living with his brother Chris, who is an entire podcast episode unto himself, in Newport News, Virginia. He had recently decamped there from Los Angeles, where, like so many of our favorite right-wing content creators, Tim was trying to be a movie star of some kind. Tim now denies that he ever wanted to be an actor, but whoopsie, he shows up in an episode of 1,000 Ways to Die, in which a mime chokes to death. And I believe
you showed me that, and it is very funny. I just want to interject one little thing here for listeners who remember the Who the Hell is Jack Posobiec episode. He also, around the same time, is kicking around trying to get into Broadway, trying to do movies exactly at the same time that Tim Pool is.
Right. So Tim told a magazine interviewer that he was trying to be an actor in L.A. When I sent him a list of questions for the first story I did on him, he denied that was true. In a follow-up, I said, did you contact the publication to request a correction for writing that you were trying to be an actor? And he didn't answer that question. But Tim tries to be an actor anyway. And for those who are really, really wondering, did Tim wear a beanie in his episode of 1,000 Ways to Die? The answer is yes, he did wear a beanie in an episode of 1,000 Ways to Die.
Okay, wait. So wait. We need to pause real quick. Do we have an actual origin date of the beanie? I don't want to get like sidetracked here, but
I can give you that. Yes,
we have proof we have proof that the beanie now exists before 2011.
Correct. The beanie was worn in 2011.
Has he ever taken this fucking thing off? Excuse my language. Has he ever taken this off? Because now we have him going back to now we're talking about 20 years of the same hat.
He's got he's got many versions of the same hat, but as far what my sources, people who knew Tim growing up, have said is that Tim started losing his hair, I think, when he was 19.
Okay.
And as a skater kid, he was very much involved in the skater world, communities. There is a longer discussion about how good a skater Tim actually is, but he was a skater. He hung out with other skaters. One of the earliest YouTube vids, in fact, is a clip of Tim Pool skateboarding in 2006, and you can find that online.
Oh, wow.
But I think in any case, as to the hair loss, I think he started losing his hair when he was a late teenager, which for anything else, whatever else you want to say about Tim Pool, that sucks, man. That really that's a tough one.
Well, so but also I just want to say here, I don't want to give him a full pass because, not his fault, but we all encounter obstacles in our lives, and it's a question of how we deal with it. And it's feel like his hair loss is almost like, it's like his Richard III, it's like he's got is part of what turns him into a Batman villain. Excuse me.
Was ever woman in this humor wooed? He said, wearing a beanie.
So I'll get us back on track.
What, we're not doing lines from Richard III.
I did that.
So Occupy Wall. Let's go back to Occupy Wall Street.
Okay,
that's happening.
So in any case. Yeah. Tim is living with his brother, and what he sees, he according to Tim, he's watching videos of Occupy on TV, and on a whim, he decides to buy a bus ticket and go down there. He does. What to do while he's down there? Well, if you were at Occupy Wall Street at any point, you saw that there were a lot of organizing committees. There was food drives. There were setting up encampments for people who were homeless. There was a lot of philanthropic work being done there and organizing work, but it's not really a clear point of entry for a then 25-year-old kid who does not have a history of political involvement. Tim claims that after he dropped out of school, he worked a bunch of retail jobs. He worked for American Airlines for a bit. And he spent some time, he says, And the way Tim's described it is that he was the director of development or director of fundraising or fundraising director for major nonprofits, often having to deal with the homeless. So I went and I watched every YouTube video in which Tim mentioned the names of these groups. Included I think it was the Human Rights Coalition, Greenpeace, like major actual nonprofits. And I called them all or emailed them. And I said, has Tim Pool ever worked for you? And they all said no. What Tim did is he got one of those jobs that every teenager with the slightest bit of political inclination gets, which is passing out flyers on corners or getting people to sign up and get donations and put their names on petitions. He was street canvassing for these organizations.
Okay. Yeah.
Which is a perfectly fine job for a 19-year-old to get. I did that when I was a teenager. But the way Tim describes it is that he had a high-level administrative position like director of development for a nonprofit dealing with homeless people. So it's another instance where Tim takes this bit of information that does have a small bit of truth and suddenly gins it up to this role of huge importance. Whenever he talks about his work working for nonprofits or working for lefty NGOs, he uses it as a jumping point to say, and I know that they're all corrupt and inefficient and useless because I had a big time job there, so you can believe me. And it's all not true. In any case, Tim gets to Occupy and he meets up with a guy named Henry Ferry, who was a real estate agent and had some money in his pocket. And Henry was trying to work on doing comms and getting broadcasts of what was going on in Occupy out to the world. There were a lot of people at Occupy doing it. There were a lot of people live streaming. But by dint of luck, Tim, who is broadcasting on Ustream, not YouTube, by the way, at this time, Ustream, I think, was most famous because it was the channel in which Stephon Marbury recorded himself for 24 hours straight eating Vaseline.
Yeah, I remember that.
So Tim is recording on these, and Tim manages to have a moment of breakout celebrity because what Tim is doing is because he is inside the encampment. He's often able to get footage that major networks or cable companies or even, digital and print reporters are not able to get, especially in terms of live, raw footage.
Like the footage is kind of like people interacting inside the encampment or sort of, are they do the drum circle type things? Like what are they doing?
It's not just the drum circle. It's the night marches, especially what Tim gravitates towards is the moments of violence and conflict when the cops are cracking down. The big one that gets him a lot of attention was this live stream that went on for 21 consecutive hours at the moment when the cops finally decided to go and clear out the occupying.
Okay. So remember I mentioned I was in India at that time. I think I was watching Tim Pool's live stream without knowing who he was or anything. Right. I was just an American expat looking to get information about what was happening in Occupy Wall Street.
He is constantly there. He is constantly gravitating towards the moments that are the most dramatic, but he's doing it from this perspective of, I'm not some parachuting journalist coming in to show you these vile, dirty communists who are making all this ruckus. I am a part of this movement. I am a spokesperson for this movement. Their and my goals are the same. I am going to give you the real truth about what we, the 99%, want and so what we are trying to do.
So at this point, he's branding himself as a leftist.
Oh, he's not just a leftist, but specifically he says, I am an activist. He's in a promotional video for Occupy saying, we are the 99%. He's like, it gets, in fact, so popular that there are networks that are picking up Tim's footage that he has used. He's licensing the stuff that he records out to cable and local TV companies. And he gets interviewed by everyone.
And when it comes to like meta reporting on media, like journalism media, Tim Pool is treated like some kind of revolutionary. You know, as Mike recounted earlier, it's not like he invented live streaming. He's not the first person to live stream a news event. But by happenstance, whether it was because so much of the Occupy movement also distrusted corporate media, because it was this sort of raw cultural moment seen through a raw lens, whatever it may be, he was treated like some just mold breaker. In November 2011, he talked to On the Media, which is a big like media program that covers the media industry. And he, like you said, Bob, says, I don't consider myself a journalist. I consider myself an activist 100%, and I'm here to support the movement.
The thing about him being an activist is part and parcel of this branding thing that he does at that point, which is very smart. He doesn't just point this camera, which is his phone, at conflict. He does it in this way that appeals to this idea that if we democratize information, we will get to a better notion of truth, that raw, unvarnished footage shot by amateurs is more accurate and more real and true than a 2-minute package put together on a cable news network.
This later becomes like an anthem supported by tech industry people like the Mark Andreessens, the Elon Musks, and so forth. That just sort of the citizen journalist is the one who's going to set us free.
Tim Pool it becomes its own little mini media firestorm for anyone paying attention to media reporting at that time. And Tim, of course, his appearance plays into that because he doesn't even look like a scruffy digital media person. He looks like a skater kid. He's wearing the beanie, of course, but he looks like someone who just cares so much about getting the truth. He doesn't even have time to wear anything but a beanie and a hoodie. And it's all part of this sort of very clever package that I think he stumbles into accidentally of the appeal of citizen journalism, that if we decentralize the mode of gathering information, we will take power out of corporate press and we will return truth to the people. And that's a very appealing thing, even for those self-same digital media people who are covering.
Yeah.
It feels more authentic than what is normally presented. And that is a very appealing hook that Tim will turn to time and time again.
So he's the man for the moment. He's getting publicity for it. He's getting praise for it. Everyone's interested in this idea, like you said, Mike, this idea of like quote unquote democratized information or whatever catches on. And even today in Silicon Valley, this is still like a guiding factor and appears in all kinds of statements, whether it's from people like Mark Zuckerberg or Elon Musk or Jack Dorsey or whatever. So I'm an activist. I'm a real voice. I'm a raw voice. He says that in 2011. The following year, October 2012, he talks to El Pais and he says, I'm not an activist. I'm a journalist. In 2018, running the clock forward a bit, he completely backtracks. He says, I don't align with Occupy Wall Street, and I never did. And in 2021, he denounced the Occupy movement as crooked. So quite the heel turn.
In fact, he said it's the most racist people have ever been, was his time in Occupy, which somehow he failed to mention this in 2011 when he was on the media. It's weird how he forgot that he was surrounded by all these racists when he's sitting down with, Terry Gross and Michael Lowinger and things like that. The other thing to point out is that Occupy got tired of him in short order. And the reasons for this were twofold. One, I think there was no small amount of jealousy that there were, again, all these live streamers there, but Tim was the one that Time Magazine decided to name its media person of the month.
He was the breakout star.
Right. So there was a certain amount of resentment for that. And he was starting to get offers of a ghostwritten book deal, and media companies wanted to build a TV show around him. So there was a resentment for that. But the other thing that really started to piss the actual Occupy organizers off, and I talked to a few of them for my story, is that this question of Tim being a part of the Occupy movement doesn't really hold water for them. One, they say he just never actually participated in any of the speaking sessions or the meetings or any of the real debates having to where the actual people who were involved were participating. And two, if an Occupy person committed some light vandalism, let's say they slashed a tire or spray painted something somewhere where they shouldn't, Tim was going to broadcast that. And for a mainstream journalist, if they did that, Occupy would certainly be pissed off at them for broadcasting that, but they would understand that that was their job. The problem with Tim, though, is he's going around saying, I am a part of the Occupy movement. I am here to support this movement. And then he starts doing things that make the movement look bad, and claims that, no, now suddenly objectivity comes cascading down out of nowhere. I have to report the unvarnished truth. That's the best way for me to support the movement.
Well, that's a big thing with left-wing street activism in general, has always been, if you are the type of person who are going to get people flagged to the cops, you are not welcome.
Yeah. And so they quickly start to sour on him and say, we don't want you associated with us. Not only are you getting it flagged to the cops, Tim Pool brags that the cops are watching his live streams and using it to target people. And he's very proud of this at the time.
So we're going to move to the next thing, but I think is a great way to end the Occupy time, because I think that we really see where he's headed from that one. So he bounces around. You told me between Spain, Pacific Northwest. He encounters Weave during the filming of Hacker Wars.
Yeah, but I think he'd already knew some of the hackers. I'm not clear on the timeline here. Basically, Occupy ends. Tim has what he says are big money offers to do all these deals with media companies to sort of keep this party going. He turns them all down and he wants to do it on his own because it's more authentic, because he can run it himself, because nobody will tell him what to do. And he does it for a while. There are protests in Spain. He goes to cover that. There are protests in the Pacific Northwest. He goes to cover that. There are a few other locations where the Occupy movement was thought might be able to continue going. And he's going to cover what amounts to low-level protests and civil unrest. But there isn't. It stops being at the center of the news cycle. Occupy does. And there isn't a lot of interest in this. And because Tim is doing it mostly on his own at this point, it starts to get very expensive for him.
Right.
So if he's going to continue his media career, he needs an influx of cash. And
after 18 months, that's when Vice enters the picture. I wrote a few pieces for Vice, so I know a little bit about them. I like the stories I wrote for Vice, by the way. They were crime stuff. This is before my writing on the far right. But I think just a quick reminder for everybody about what Vice was and where it came from. What's the background here? So it's founded in the 1990s by Sharush Alvi, Shane Smith, and Gavin McGinnis,
who you may recognize as the name of the man who started the Proud Boys.
Yes. Correct. Also,
he was long gone from Vice by the time he did that, but an interesting footnote.
Also, repeatedly put a butt plug in his ass on a live stream for reasons we can't figure out, especially from somebody so openly homophobic. He is also withdrew a big sword outside of the Young Republicans Club, and which led to which preceded a huge brawl. Not my favorite guy, and I was about to say not my favorite New Yorker, but he's Canadian, so we don't have anything to do with him.
Just to clarify, it was a plastic sword. He mock drew a sword. It was not. He did not study.
Is that true? Okay, I didn't.
Yeah, it was a plastic sword.
Well, back to Tim Pool. I remember when I was going to school at NYU, that you get the print copies of Vice, and I described it as belly of the beast hipster shit, really I just did cocaine off the floor of Houlihan's, and then I went to.
I mean, it was quintessential mid 2000s Williamsburg hipster shit,
hipster bullshit,
the cultural energy that gave us the Strokes, which I love. I love the Strokes, but
I'm not a big Strokes guy personally, but
it's that territory of culture.
But I was thinking,
if you started dressing like Johnny Knoxville in 2002, this is the magazine that you would pick up.
That band Chick Chick Chick, I believe they're called, where it's just only exclamation points. Yeah. Okay. Yes, very very belly of the beast hipster shit, and they are kind of expanding into the normie news world, and they have ambitions of kind of overtaking CNN and the New York Times and stuff like that. They really think that they can do that. There's a lot of cocaine involved here, but they are getting the traffic.
Allegedly. Allegedly, there's a lot of cocaine involved.
There's allegedly a lot of, but there's articles about. I can legally say that. There's
allegedly,
yeah. I feel like half of Vice content at the time was I did insert drug and went to insert cultural
country,
activity, and
yes. Anyway, but when I pitched stories to them and I wanted to do it, I was well, they have it. In my mind, they have a certain cred that is going to help me in general. And that was what Vice's branding was at the time that they picked up Tim Pool. They were, kind of star makers in journalism. So Pool joins Vice in 2013. and the company's really peaking. But people around him, as soon as they bring him on, he's sort of there to do video content. Is that correct, Bob? But his producers or his editors or whomever, somebody tells you that he was bringing nothing to the table from jump. And this is where we get to the question of what does Tim Pool do, actually? Because so far all we have is a little bit of background about his family. We got a little bit of live streaming and Occupy and a lot and an appetite for attention. But like, in terms of work, what does he do?
Well, the reason Vice hired him is they basically wanted to get they wanted to repeat the viral success of his Occupy live streams, but at scale. And they thought, okay, well, we can take this personality that people really enjoy. That's the other thing. Tim wasn't just standing there pointing a camera at things. Tim was putting a camera at himself with the chaos or whatever he wanted to capture in the background and directly addressing the camera. That the Tim Pool persona that you'll see in the YouTube videos was built out starting in Occupy and continuing in those early Vice videos, where it is, let's send this Tim Pool character to a place where there is sectarian violence, civilian unrest, chaos in far-flung parts of the world. And this was something that Vice News was already doing. They were already going to these locations. They got yelled at by David Carr by thinking it's so cool that they went to Laos and stuff like that 2 years earlier. But Tim Pool was going to be this youthful face of, we can say, here is this brave young man who is so scruffy and earnest and just wants to tell the truth, gosh darn it. And we will, provide him with a support staff and video teams and editors and writers. And we will take this DIY project of his that brought him fame and professionalize.
Right.
The question, though, of what Tim Pool actually does is Tim Pool does nothing. Tim Pool is the face. Tim Pool is there to attract attention to Tim Pool. He doesn't know how to go to these places and report on these conditions. He has a real hard time, according to his Vice colleagues, processing articles longer than 600 words. He really doesn't seem particularly interested in learning about the various locations that he's going to. He thinks he can just do what he did at Occupy, which is show up, point camera at Tim Pool, talk, and be done. He, at various points, offends the fixers and the handlers and the family members that they meet. This will happen later in Ferguson because he doesn't seem particularly interested in what's happening with them. Tim Pool's only interest is that Tim Pool is there.
Right. So the news story for Tim oftentimes seems to be there is a news story, there is a place, and the news story is me in it. It's like, I'm here. It's almost like a one-man show of news. It's not necessarily that, it's usually the way he describes these things, and I've watched a few of them, is just sort of like less informative and just sort of like, oh my God, it's nuts for me. I'm here. Right.
That's what it is. Yes.
And I also think another important thing to note here is that, like, compared to Occupy, where Tim was comparatively like getting right in the middle of the action during these tense conflicts, by the time he goes to Vice and he's tasked with pointing the camera at the conflict, he's a lot more timid, it sounds like, right?
Oh,
I mean, we have
petrified.
A piece in this note about the Gezi Park protests in Turkey at the time, right? What happened then, Bob?
Well, here's the thing. The Occupy protests, yes, the police were there and they were cracking skulls. There was absolutely a threat of violence if you were down there during the worst moments. But he was entirely surrounded by Americans. He still was, in many parts, considered a part of that movement. So there were other Occupy protesters around him. He was not in any real serious danger when he was filming the Occupy protests. If you go to Gezi Park in Turkey during civilian violence, that's dangerous. If you go to Thailand for anti-government protests, that's dangerous. If you go to Venezuela, that is legitimately dangerous. And Tim is not exactly sure that he wants to put himself in that much danger. He claims entirely the opposite. The quote he gave me, and I love this from him for my story, is, I covered the Gezi Park protests to resounding success and constantly threw myself into danger.
Well, you watch the video, but you can watch the video for yourself and see him on the outskirts of these things. And if you read about what was going on at that time, for people who are not familiar with those protests, it's sort of the aftershocks of the Arab Spring kind of got to Turkey. There are these, the clashes are pretty are pretty startling. And here you have a guy and violent, and you have him in the middle, and it's sort of disaster tourism, which is the criticism that most people put towards Vice, right? Like it was like, I mean, Vice did some really good work here or there. I don't want to make it all one thing, but the caricature of bad Vice reporting was exactly what Tim Pool did.
Right. There's a whole point in which there's one Vice video where he's in Thailand when the protests are ongoing and there's government troops in the street, and there's a 40-minute video of Tim riding around on the back of someone's moped on the outskirts of town that gets published on Vice's YouTube channel.
I just want to say that video is so funny for anybody. This is an audio podcast, another thing, but like, again, having lived in India for those 5 years, it looks like the Mumbai suburbs, right? Is the way it kind of looks. It's just like where there's just, and he's just kind of whizzing around, be like, and it's sort of like but he's basically like, yeah, we're here. Things are popping off. Things are getting crazy. I hear things are getting crazy, and then it's just like, it's just a live stream of him just whizzing around.
And the editors back in New York are really upset about this because it's their job to take this footage that is being sent of Pool and craft it into something that can be presented as news. Like one producer told me, we got all like hours and hours of footage of Tim in his hotel room describing what his equipment was. There was all this footage of him wandering around the following morning, sort of pointing at rubble and going, wow, that looks really bad, man. And
we have some stuff about him talking about equipment. But we'll get to in a bit, but
yeah.
I want to hear.
The thing is now, even though the producers' advice were like, I don't know what to do with this, they were told, those producers told me for this story, is that Vice made it clear that you have to make Tim Pool look good. In fact, there was one episode that was supposedly had to be entirely re-edited at the last minute because it didn't make Tim look good enough. Vice had invested no small amount of money in hiring Tim and giving him this entire production team to work with and dedicating this entire staff towards making these videos. And what's coming out is just not up to snuff. And it's certainly not getting the kind of viral attention that Tim got at Occupy. And I want to point out something here. Like, I am not a person who has covered civilian conflict. I am not a war reporter by any stretch of the imagination. If you said to me, Bob, please go to far-flung location X and report in person on what's going on there, I would be scared. I don't think there's anything wrong with being scared by that.
Sure.
I think it is very normal to be scared by that. Tim, on the other hand, can't really admit that it scares him. One other thing that happened that was really funny advice is that they gave reporters, in fact, dedicated flak jackets to wear and sort of protective gear.
That's what I was going to ask about.
And Tim, according to his colleagues, had a tendency to wear this stuff around the office.
Yeah.
For reasons that they couldn't particularly fathom, but they all found it. They found it they found it clownish and silly that there's a guy wandering around an open space Williamsburg floor plan wearing a pith helmet and a flak jacket.
Does he have "Born to Kill" written on the flak jacket?
If you go back into the Internet Archive and you look at photos of Tim's Twitter account from that time, it's a picture of him looking like the Great Gazoo with a giant oversized helmet on.
I saw that. Yeah, if you see it, it looks like you know when football players are recovering from a concussion and they have that extra padding. That's what it kind of looks like. Well,
he's wearing the Guardian cap. Oh, and they even went to the point of drawing a cartoon of Tim as a disembodied penis wearing a flak jacket with a pith helmet about to be executed by ISIS to make fun of it.
This is one of his colleagues drew that. It's a very good cartoon.
One of his colleagues' advice. Now the thing is that I want to stress is that they thought it was weird and silly of him to do this, but they were also really offended on a deep level because there were Vice reporters. There were Vice reporters who were held hostage at the time. And there were Vice reporters who were putting themselves, and if you want to include Tim in that, okay, Vice reporters were putting themselves in real danger. And the thing that they said is he's treating it like he's cosplaying. He thinks this is all a costume that Tim Pool gets to wear and doesn't seem to in any way be able to understand that the reason people wearing it is because they're going into dangerous spaces to tell the story of those people and not about you, Tim. And that's what the thing that really upset them.
And it doesn't seem like a fake it till you make it type thing with Poole. It seems like he thinks he's already there. Like he doesn't realize that he has been doing this for all of like a few live streams. He thinks that he is now like a world-class journalist who is risking his life for people's information.
Well, he's gotten ink in huge publications treating him that way. It's like, this is what he has been told. And, you know, it's one of those things. If people tell you the same thing over and over again long enough, well, why wouldn't he think that? I think most people, like, it's very hard in those moments, especially coming from the background he did of just kind of a ho-hum, you know, otherwise unremarkable life. He's getting all this attention, and it can be difficult to be humble in those moments, right?
Yeah, I think what you're saying is very smart, which is that, yes, obviously, if you had spent a year with people telling you you are the face of digital media in America, and then you go to Vice and everyone is like, no, you suck, dude. I think a lot of people would go, wait a second, I don't suck. I'm awesome. You must all be the ones who suck.
You're jealous.
You're just jealous. And by the way, he also has this thing of telling everyone at Vice how much he's being paid, which is about 3 times what the digital media staff is earning at that time. So they really get that they love. That Tim sort of
because it's like why would you say I suck? I'm the talent here.
Yeah, like, I'm being paid $150,000 a year in 2013 to get travel to travel all over the globe while you're chained to a desk writing 10 blogs a day for 30 grand. Why? What the fuck is wrong with you, asshole?
So towards the end of his time at Vice, we're starting to see a little bit more about like what Tim Poole's sort of frontline quote unquote journalism is really all about, right? He is really cozying up to tech companies. He does this presentation about how awesome Google Glass is, which you might remember, the comical looking, like reading glasses type things that had a video camera. It was like a huge flop for Google, but here's a little clip of that.
The key benefit to Glass is that you're always in the field. The point of wearing it is that no matter where I'm at, I can take a picture or video instantly. So I can catch anything that happens, you know, breaking news. And
he also starts up his own YouTube channel towards the end of his time at Vice, and he's doing some semi-overlapping coverage sort of things. He is doing vlogs, shifting to like daily vlogs. It's clear that, you know, I get the sense looking at his content from that time that he's sort of feeling out like what it might look like to leave Vice. Like if he wanted to go back and do it on his own, now that he has the cachet of Vice behind him, could he do it? What would it look like? And he takes this trip to Venezuela, which while he's there, he says somebody has accused him of being a spy, some Maduro regime media figure, and he puts out this video in all caps titled, "I will be killed if I go to Venezuela." And despite the name of the video, I mean, you might expect something crazy in it, but he's mostly like skateboarding. And I want to put another clip here about him discussing a UPS store where his fans can send him little gifts or money or whatever.
And it's from this video. It's from this Venezuela video.
Commercial for UPS. But I just wanted to let you all know, I've had a few people ask me about sending me things, and I've kind of, I hate to say this, but I kind of just ignore a lot of these messages because I didn't want to give out. People already know where I live, kind of, but I didn't want to just post my address. So what I did was I set up a P.O. box. Timothy Poole.
Now, the thing about the Venezuela, I looked into this when I was reporting out this story. There was part of what Tim says is true. A very popular Venezuelan figure connected with the Maduro government who had, I think, 800,000 YouTube subscribers when I looked at his account in 2020. So I'm not sure how many it was in 2013, 14 when Tim was there, but it was a lot. And that's, like you said, that's the kind of thing that could be very, very scary. But the figure didn't accuse him of, but the media figure didn't say he was CIA. No one said he was CIA. The media figure just said, don't trust him. Don't talk to this person. Okay, that happens. And I scrolled through all the replies to that post. There's no mention of CIA except for a couple of random American accounts basically accusing, funnily enough, Tim Pool of being sent there by USAID, which is clearly a CIA front. So that makes Tim Pool CIA.
RIP to a real agency.
Yeah. And Tim also in that video hilariously recounts a story about his friend's Facebook chat account being hacked and sending Tim fake messages, which Tim Pool assumes is either the Venezuelan government or the US government trying to figure out what he's doing there. And you can see this seed of conspiracy theorizing. But what the Vice staffers I spoke to said is that while Tim was there, he told them about the threat that he received from this media figure. And he immediately insisted that you guys have to send more security out here or I'm leaving. And Vice said, we have the budget for the people that are there, the security that's there. Sorry, no, we can't. So Tim Pool leaves in the middle of the shoot. And you can, again, say what you will about how cautious Vice was with its reporters and how well they adhered to best media practices. But Vice certainly didn't think there was real danger because they sent other reporters there to finish the story after Tim left. And none of them died. So take that for what you will.
So let's keep it moving from his time at Vice. When did he leave Vice, Bob?
Tim Pool leaves Vice shortly after the protests in Ferguson in the summer of 2014.
Okay, so Ferguson, Missouri, this becomes like a major flashpoint in the culture wars that would help later give birth to Trump. It's a sort of soft, segregated neighborhood with a long history of a police abuse from the Ferguson Police Department. An 18-year-old black guy named Michael Brown is gunned down by an officer named Darren Wilson. There's a conflict between them that precedes this that makes it a little bit more complicated. And the very beginnings of the alt-right movement really sees on this as an instance of like white cops being, kind of mistreated by the media and kind of being crucified by liberals. And Tim is there with Vice at the very end of his career. And what happens, Bob?
Naturally, of course, when the protests really kick off in Ferguson, Vice is going to send reporters down to cover this. It is squarely in the middle of their editorial wheelhouse. So Tim is sent down. Other teams of reporters are sent down as well. He's not the only one. And all of the same patterns that had cropped up during Tim's first year now in Vice are present in Ferguson. He doesn't seem particularly interested in learning about why the protests are taking place. He doesn't seem particularly interested in learning about the history of police abuse that is taking place there. He doesn't seem particularly interested in learning or doing much of prep to be able to talk to people when fixers introduce them to various families who are ready to go on camera. Tim seems kind of bored by them. And according to at least one producer, they said like a lot of the people that got really upset because Tim is going to interview families once again wearing that same helmet and flak jacket that he had. And that's just not the kind of thing you do if you are walking into someone's home and you're trying to build their trust. The way they took it as is that Tim is saying, oh, you people live in a war zone, so I need to protect myself. And they were people didn't want to deal with him because they saw him as being already made up their minds about who they are as people and dismissing them.
So the flak jacket is really in response to black neighbors who are have sort of gotten together and are protesting the police.
Yeah, basically, if he's walking into someone's home to talk to a family and he's wearing a flak jacket, what would you say about that person? What would you think about them? You would think, do you think I'm going to beat you over the head with a polo mallet that I got stored in the closet here? What do you think is going to happen in my home? Why are you guarded like this? And his persona is they said, equally guarded. So the night one of the earliest nights when they're going out to shoot coverage, the Vice decides that they're going to do a la Occupy. They're going to do live streams there. They're going to live stream the protests as they're happening. They're going to live stream the police brutality as it's happening. Tim, on one night, shows up late. They're all waiting for him, and it's because Tim was evidently, according to the sources I've spoken to, more concerned about the lack of security and wanted more equipment and wanted more protective coverage while he was going to be out there. So they're late getting there. Tim does not actually make it into the streets where the protests are happening, but is sort of kept left behind in a small pen that is reserved for the press. So it happens on Vice's channel, and you can watch all of this, by the way. There is a very large screen, and tucked in one corner is Tim's live stream. And Tim's live stream is a bunch of press people in the parking lot of a Target. And the other reporters are wandering around talking to protesters, taking shots of the very, very, very heavily militarized police force that has descended on Ferguson. Cops in full battle rattle, riot gear, heavy armaments, and that's what they're getting. And the Vice audience that is watching this treats this as a sort of odd competition. And Tim's is losing very badly. They are wondering why they are being shown this one corner shot of a guy in a Target parking lot when the real action is happening in the rest of the screen. Tim basically gets humiliated on Vice's live channel and throws a conniption fit about it with his various bosses, saying that everyone is screwing up and everything is getting messed up and no one is listening to him. And if this isn't fixed immediately, he's out of there. And he demands, in fact, a meeting with Shane Smith to talk about how awful his producers are and how they're failing to live up to his expectations.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah. He actually years later goes on the record with Andrew Morantz at the New Yorker and says what turns out to be a demonstrably false statement, which is that the other people, the other reporters, were busy trying to get an interview with Jesse Jackson while he was the one out in the streets covering the real action. The New Yorker prints this and then has to delete the quote from Tim. There's a note at the bottom of the New Yorker article that says it was removed for not being true.
Jesus.
Tim basically inverts what happened and says, actually, no, he was the hero of this story and no one at Vice would listen to him because they wanted to talk to Jesse Jackson.
So does he leave or get fired here?
He, I believe, leaves. He leaves on his own accord. He was already, according to sources, getting offers to be poached before this incident, but this I think he may have seen the writing on the wall and ended up doubling his salary going from Vice to Fusion in the process.
So before we jump to Fusion, I just feel like noting a theme that I'm picking up already. And we're at 2014. We are still more than a decade before today. But it seems that no matter what happens to Tim, he is just militant about curating his persona. And I guess it is critical to his career. But it just the way that he, in some cases, like the one you noted, just outright distorts or maybe fluffs up or exaggerates various aspects of whether it's his upbringing or his media bona fides. It's all very interesting to me.
Yeah.
Right? And I don't know. I was raised by my parents to think, like, if you encounter somebody who like lies about the dumb small stuff, like, you should be worried about like everything else they tell you.
Yeah, Tim basically Tim decides that the actual victim in this story is him. Tim does that time and time. And I think it's also very important to note that these fabrications often happen when Tim is afraid of something. The fabrications about what happened in Venezuela is he was afraid of what was going on in the streets and couldn't deal with the fact that he probably wasn't in serious physical danger and made up a story about how he's about to be killed. Tim goes to Gezi Park and says that there are people who are dropping Molotov cocktails over the place. There was one explosive that goes off 20 feet away. Tim exaggerates the danger to justify his own fears, it seems to me, and then feels the need to play is constantly running away from these things that sometimes justifiably scare him. The other thing that really that triggered it in this instance is the other reporters who are getting all this attention in Ferguson. Well, golly, they happen to be women. And I am speculating here, but I think you could conceivably make the argument that the fact that two women were doing the reporting that was attracting all of these viewers and not Tim is something that stuck in his craw a great deal.
Well, we have time to get into his thoughts about women a little bit later. But he goes to Fusion, which is a Western TV outlet run by Univision, and my memory of Fusion is they just kind of like blew up on impact. They were like extremely fast expansion and lots of excitement, and then out very quickly. And that's what I remember. Tell me a little bit about the Fusion era.
Tim, partnership. Well, Fusion was like a lot of frothy digital startups in 2013, 14, 15. They had a great deal of money backing their efforts and no real idea about what they wanted to do with that. They made a lot of buzzy hires. They poached other people in digital media who were popular. They made a lot of noise about being this, new powerhouse. And especially because it wasn't just backed by Univision, they had Disney money that was invested into it. There was a lot of cash behind this effort. But for anyone who's worked in digital media, you will know that sometime, while having money is definitely a good thing, an editorial direction is a lot more important. And Fusion never really settled on that. So their ethos was, we will appeal to young people. And the dominant political mode, it was sort of casual consumerist leftism, is, I guess, the way I would describe it. And so that's the audience that they were targeting. And Tim fits exactly into that. So they're going to have Tim do the exact same thing that he did at Vice. And they're basically banking on the same deal that Vice was banking on, which is that Tim will be able to capture the viral energy that he got at Occupy and bring us clicks, and clicks equals money, and everyone profits.
So he's really kind of just still riding the Occupy thing at this point.
Oh, he's absolutely coasting off his rep at Occupy. I think Vice did, if you watch some of the Vice videos, and God love me, I watched them all. Some of them are really well done. And he wasn't just riffing in those videos. A lot of times he's reading off a script. So there were reporters writing copy for him. So he will present, so information will get presented in a mostly coherent way. And all these videos are not, while there were live streams that were published by Vice, and as part of it, the actual edited videos that they put out, they were reasonably well done.
Right. They were high standards at, at Vice. So the Fusion thing dies out fairly quickly, and he later complains that it was that they were too leftist and that sort of thing.
Right. So Tim basically goes from there to there, and the exact same problems happen. He doesn't know there's a dearth of ideas about what he wants to cover. He doesn't really know what he wants to do as a reporter because he's not a reporter. He's just a guy who puts a camera on his face and talks in various places where interesting things are happening. So, of course, he doesn't have ideas about what kind of coverage and reporting he wants to do. He doesn't have that skill set. And in this, I sort of feel bad for him because he's being paid a lot of money to do this. And I think somehow deep down, he has to know that he doesn't have the skill set to do it. And there's certainly no way for him to learn on the job at that salary level. So what happens is, over time, he just sort of starts doing less and less work. At one point, also, he complains about living in New York City. The inciting incident is there were two cops who were shot on Tompkins Square Park in 2014. And to Tim, there were two cops who were in a squad car, and they got executed. And for Tim, this was a huge deal. To Tim, this meant the evil gangland hordes were converging in on him. So Tim convinces Vice to put him up at a really cushy pad down in Miami. And they do it. Wow. So Tim is now not only being paid, I think, in excess of $200,000 to do this, and has a dedicated team and a dedicated filming budget. They actually put him up in an apartment as well. But he's just doing less and less because he doesn't really have much to say or any ideas about what to do. And of course, people at Fusion who are being paid less than him are really beginning to resent this. They're also resenting the fact that why is this guy who's being given all this money actually sort of doing nothing?
Honestly, I got to be honest. Like it does seem weird. It is a weird kind of charmed life this guy has to be like, with all the hardship that people face in journalism, that this guy who live streamed a bit at Occupy Wall Street is now got an apartment in Miami and is kind of getting paid $200,000. He's getting a banker's salary to do nothing.
Felix Salmon, who also famously has been paid a great deal of money by various digital media companies, is on the record in the first Tim Pool story I wrote, talking very specifically about how people were dissatisfied with how little work Tim was putting out. And Tim, to his credit here, doesn't try to deny it. What Tim says is, is that he was slapped with golden handcuffs. They would not, Fusion would not let him out of his contract. They wouldn't let him leave. He couldn't leave, is the way he put it. I have a feeling
I'll take that job. I'll just sit in the
Yeah,
apartment and do
if
shit.
any listeners have pairs of golden handcuffs laying around,
You can handcuff me to the bed. Go ahead with my
It's
golden handcuffs.
absolutely
yeah,
wild.
Mike, you would look good in a set of handcuffs.
Thank you. One of our listeners want to put me in some golden handcuffs. Let's do it.
Yeah. I can get you a website for that. The thing that Tim, it's really, Tim stresses that they would not let him leave, and he couldn't, no matter what. I have my doubts about whether Tim could have broken his contract if he really wanted to. I think he stayed and got paid handsomely for doing relatively little work, like a lot of people would. In fact, I can prove that Tim really didn't try that hard to get out of his contract, because when his contract was up, I have emails from Fusion editors strategizing about how to tell Tim that they weren't renewing his contract in a way that would soften the blow so he wouldn't go running to the press about how Vice is awful and they just fired me and get bad press for Vice. So that's not exactly true either. But Tim basically rides out Fusion for 2 years, not doing much and earning, close to $500,000 for his effort.
So right around the time of the 2016 election, kind of opening up, right, where Trump is kind of rising, and there's the Bernie movement, and Hillary is like this punching bag for most of the kind of young male internet that Tim Pool would be associated with. He finally does go solo, and that is the beginnings of what will be the Tim Pool that we know and the reason why this podcast exists in the first place. So the first kind of material he does is sort of best described as criticisms of journalism and the journalism industry. It's not only that, but it's a reoccurring theme. Isn't that right, Jared?
Yeah. I mean, that's what a lot of it is. That was kind of his pitch to go independent. And we see a lot of people that go independent make similar pitches, right? Where it's like, I was in digital media and I can tell you firsthand just how corrupt it is, or how crooked it is, or how, self-censoring or filtered it might be. And some of those criticisms have legitimacy. Major news outlets do filter themselves. And there's like a whole host of like media theories about why they do it and what that looks like. We talked about some of it with Renee DeResta last week, but this is like really core to his identity, right? He starts out as like, I'm an activist. I'm just filming. Actually, no, I'm a journalist. I'm not an activist. I'm like, on the front lines of democratizing information. And throughout his whole persona, whether he is at these larger organizations or vlogging on the side, that perception of independence, like, it is so core to his identity and the way that he's trying to sell himself. So I think that motivates a lot of this early content, right? Where it's like journalism is dying and like, I'm going to give it to you straight.
Right. Absolutely.
This is one other thing about Fusion. Tim also repeatedly says that Fusion execs told him directly, not just him, but the entire staff, that they should lie to the audience, that they should slant their coverage to make sure that it has a leftist point of view. And this was he talks about this constantly in current YouTube videos about how Fusion told him to lie. And so the reason that he didn't do any work was not just that he was stunted, but they were asking him to be dishonest. And Tim Pool, authentic DIY chronicler of Occupy, the last thing he would ever do is be less than truthful with his devoted fans. I spoke to a number of Fusion executives for the story. All of them deny it fervently. I am willing to bet that they generally pitch articles from a left-leaning perspective, that, if you're at a pitch meeting or an editorial meeting, that's the kind of stuff that come up. But I find it fantastically hard to believe that any editor worth their salt, even if this is what they wanted, would ever tell people to lie to their audience, which is how Tim does it. And I think it's important to point out what you said, Jared, which is that when Tim is doing these sort of little mini editorials in the first years of his YouTube, he's talking about the only thing that he actually has any real world experiences, which is being told now by 2 digital media companies that you are not good enough to do this. And so, of course, his response is going to be, no, the problem is not with me. The problem is with digital media. These people are corporate. They're just as bad as the old corporate press. They've been trained to lie to you. How do I know that they lied to you? Well, they told me that I suck. So clearly they're liars. So, of course, this is what he's mining for material, because honestly, it's the only thing in his actual real world experience that he has to draw upon. And because he's Tim Pool, he's going to frame it in a way that makes him look as good as possible.
There was one video he uploaded years ago titled "Journalism is Dying." And he explains the reasons why he thinks that is. A lot of them tend to center on how news publications are both playing to algorithmic bias online and also being manipulated by them into kind of pigeonholing or doing confirmation bias on their audience. I'm going to play a clip of that just because it's interesting to listen to if we consider his career today. And listeners, just tuck this in the back of your head as we keep going on this podcast.
Factually 100% correct. If it offends the audience, don't do it, because we want to side with the audience. And that's kind of what's happening. And that's bad for news. That's ultimately bad for news. This trend will ultimately lend itself to some kind of support system for influencers to communicate their opinions, and some news will be there. But that's just the future we're looking at. And I'm sure some people think it's good and some people think it's bad. I'm just telling you a quick fact about it. Now, I want to be a little bit more specific about why I'm doing daily.
A lot of his early videos also were just kind of editorializing on the news. A very popular format, and he did this to a couple of my articles, one of which we'll talk about in a bit, was to take a news story and just kind of gawk at it, be like, the news media wants you to think this, but actually, maybe it's not. But I'm not saying it's not, but maybe it's not. That was kind of his whole shtick. And boy, did he have some takes that aged real bad here. One of them that I want to play, Mike, I think you found this, is called, "Is Trump really as bad as they say?" Now, Tim Pool hadn't turned the corner and just been like, I vote for Trump, Trump rocks yet. He was still doing that, I'm, a liberal leftist kind of guy. And this is what he says about Trump. And this is, circa 2016. Again, listeners, just check this out and think about how maybe this is aged.
What if I told you that Donald Trump has called for taxing the rich? Because he did. In an interview with CNN and in several other occasions, he has said wealthy who are using tax loopholes should not be allowed to do it, and they should pay more in taxes. And what if I told you Donald Trump actually defended Planned Parenthood? And this happened not too long ago on the debate stage. He said many women use Planned Parenthood for practical reasons. Now, he did go on to say he would defund them due to them providing abortions. But what front-running Republican has ever called for taxing the rich or defended Planned Parenthood in any way? Now, for everyone calling him anti...
So there's another video I want to highlight, too, before we keep going along this path and see how Tim's independent YouTube career evolved. This one, I think, is revealing because it is sort of one of the earlier signals of Tim starting to cozy up with these far-right figures. There were maybe, in hindsight, instances you could say were like, oh, well, that's like a flag, or like, oh, he's interacting with this person who becomes relevant later. But one of the things that comes up on his channel a few times around this period is his kind of fascination with 4chan, and specifically the politically incorrect board on 4chan, which at the time, and even still today, but especially at the time, was just a hive of racist troll activity. And I just think this clip is funny. It's about how 4chan has become too powerful, and he applauds 4chan. You won, is what he says.
Well, I think it's finally time to say that 4chan has won. You did it. You won. Congratulations, Paul. Man, the feats that have been pulled off by 4chan this past election cycle. And, look, for a while I found it to be funny. These trolls, these
ridiculously influential trolls that have been pulled off by 4chan. And now I think it's time to say it's over. They won. I don't know.
He also does other videos at this time talking about people like Lauren Southern, who would go on to be a quite notable far-right activist. He's talking to people like James Alsup, bumping shoulders with outlets like InfoWars. There's just all these signs. He's making this content. He is a digital native. I will give him that. And he's playing to it, finding some amount of success, sort of. I get the sense of like feeling out what his audience is or like what his audience might want and just going with that. So let's spin the clock forward to 2017. Tim is like nice and independent. Trump is in office. Where are we at?
Tim goes to Sweden.
As one does. The background
of how he gets to Sweden is very important. So Trump gives a speech in which he throws out this idea that there was a terror attack in Sweden. People later figure out he's talking about Malmö, Sweden, which is an area that has had a large influx of refugees from the Middle East, specifically Iraq and Syria. Somebody there had committed suicide in a sort of a public display. And that's really where Trump got the idea of the terror attack that he threw out there. When Trump said that, there was a sort of a blowback from liberals, including Chelsea Clinton, who made fun of Trump, and people making jokes using IKEA as like there's a terror attack, and just some sort of reference to IKEA to make it funny. And the alt-right gets very defensive. The alt-right is still an ascendant thing at that time. Precedes the Charlottesville Unite the Right rally. And Paul Joseph Watson, a British commentator for InfoWars, who is famous for the catchphrase, "Imagine my shock."
Imagine my shock.
Well, imagine my shock.
And who has since been found, we're not going to play this audio, but it's since been found on a hot mic at a party saying the most shockingly racist and anti-Semitic things possible, like just to show how just the core of this guy, how horribly racist and bigoted this guy is. I mean, he's just grotesque.
I cut this clip and sat on it for a minute. I'm not opposed to playing offensive things when it illustrates a point on this show, but it is just disgusting.
And if I had, but play it.
If I no, I think we're going to pass because it's just too much.
If I had to bleep out the racial slurs in it, the whole clip would just sound
exactly.
Like, boo!
Oh no, it's awful. I've heard it.
Yeah. So Paul Joseph Watson puts out a kind of a bounty of like $2,000. I'll give $2,000 to a journalist who's willing to go to Malmö and actually report on the hell that's happening to Sweden, which is very cheap. And I don't know why this got media coverage, but it did. The BBC actually covered this among other places. And it does not seem to me like there was much of a competition for what journalist would actually take it, because Tim Pool is already pretty well known as a friendly to the far right at this point. He's moving in that direction.
Oh, yeah. Tim Pool at this point had done a number of interviews with not just Mike Cernovich, but with Baked Alaska, would be coming soon. He's interviewed Brittany Pettibone. He interviews Lauren Southern. He interviews all these people. One of the famous ones when he's interviewing Baked Alaska is, "Are you a white nationalist?" To which Baked Alaska replies, "No." And that's the end of the questioning. He says the same thing to Mike Cernovich. "Are you a racist?" And Mike Cernovich says, "No." And Tim's done with it. He keeps like, that's job well done.
That's journalism, baby.
Yeah, well, going back to all the complaints that people at Vice and Fusion had about Tim not being willing to do his homework before doing any of these stories, suddenly what was a weakness in digital media becomes a real strength for him. Because if you want to say, do a sit-down interview with Sargon of Akkad, it's probably a good idea not to read any of the things that Sargon of Akkad has said, because you might come up with a hostile confrontational interview with that person if you had done the reading. Tim doesn't. So he can just meet Sargon of Akkad as a friendly person. There's a conversation that Daniel Lombroso, who directed a documentary about the alt-right, did. And Tim and Sargon are there hanging out late one night while Lombroso is gathering footage. This was the documentary that Lauren Southern featured prominently in. And according to Lombroso, Tim and Sargon were basically in lockstep the entire night, talking about how a race war is going to come. And this is in 2016. It was mainly Sargon, or Carl Benjamin, as he's known to the few family members who can probably stand him, who was, according to Lombroso, making the most vehement claims that race war is happening soon. Race war is coming. Race war is coming. But Tim is sitting there sort of nodding in agreement and chiming in yes the entire time. So by the time the Sweden thing comes up, Tim is sort of already very much in this world. According to my sources, Tim had already planned to go to Sweden before Paul Joseph Watson even offered the $2,000. But he figured, hey, free $2,000, I'll take it. I'll go anyway.
Do we know of whether he had like a friendly relationship with Paul Joseph Watson, or do they just know each other on Twitter? I mean, like how do they?
According to my sources, I don't think they. Tim tended to be a bit of a homebody. He always has been. He doesn't really like to leave the various compounds that he's owned over the years. I think, to the best of my knowledge, it was a digital only relationship that they knew each other on the Twitter.
So the journalism that he ultimately does there is pretty straightforward race baiting stuff, right? I mean, that's the way I would describe it. There's a little bit of I mean, when I say journal, I should reset. The propaganda that he produces is pretty standard race baiting stuff with a little bit of I interviewed the other side sprinkled in.
Do you think that there's been more violent crime?
At the last 2 years, maybe.
Do you think that has anything to do with refugees?
Yeah.
Right. Well, what happens is he goes, well, Tim's an independent journalist. He's got to hear all sides. But Tim's version of all sides journalism, and again, I'm going to highlight this, Tim doesn't do his homework part. He interviews a far-right columnist named Ivan Arpi, who had said that Google is hiding search results to make people gay and all kinds of just absolutely deranged stuff. Tim has no idea about this and just introduces him as a reporter. He interviews another guy who's the head of one of the leading fake news sites in Sweden with a history of publishing gutter racism. Tim never mentions any of this. He sits in on like a meeting of the Sweden Democrats, the far-right Swedish party that is founded by descendants of Nazis, and never seems to figure out that he's sitting in a room with a bunch of Nazis. On the other hand, when Tim introduces a politician from Malmo, he makes sure to tell his viewers, like, well, okay, this guy has just told us that refugees aren't causing a crime spike in Sweden, but, take that with a grain of salt because he's a liberal. The whole documentary also is a giant flop. It's, again, more of Tim wandering around a suburb of like Rinkeby and trying to figure out what to do. He also at one point meets up with a bowling alley with a bunch of Swedish neo-Nazis, but forgets to sort of figure out that they're neo-Nazis. They were introduced to him by the junk news publisher and sort of doesn't really seem to know who they are or why they're pushing this anti-immigrant information. He presents Nazi information and white nationalism, and suddenly he's objective. Whenever Tim encounters someone with a leftist, he suddenly makes sure that the audience has to know, wait a second, this might be a lying liberal, so take that with a grain of salt. The other thing that Tim does is amazing is he actually sits down with an expert in immigration in Sweden who explains to him in granular detail. And this video was published by the YouTuber Hey It's Vadim, so you can watch the whole thing if you want. The long interview in which Tim is told in painstaking detail that Trump is wrong, that immigrants are not causing a crime spike, and they don't need to fear refugee gangs. Tim does not include a single second of that interview in his final product. But what gets Tim the kind of viral fame that he had not had really since Occupy is the last video in the series in which purportedly, Tim is about to go interview a bunch of people in a shopping area, but there are a bunch of very scary looking men who happen to be people of color who are putting on masks and getting ready to attack Tim and his film crew, were it not for the interventions of the police who whisked Tim away to safety.
There were several men. They started, they were pulling up masks on their faces. One guy, he throws a hood over his head. And we had noticed this. We started kind of getting, okay, what's happening? The officer said that, hey, have you noticed what people are doing around you? If we leave in a few minutes, it might be very bad for you, so it might be smart for you to, to go. And and then I was like, we should leave. Like, are you saying maybe we should just go to our car? He's like, that's my tip for you, maybe. And I said, okay. And the cop said, look, maybe if we arrest one of these guys, there could be 50 more in a few minutes with stones.
And I was like, okay. So
once again, Tim Pool, intrepid journalist, throws himself into the midst of danger. And whoopsie, that danger just seems to confirm all of the priors of his now very clearly right-wing audience who are afraid of these immigrants and want to back up the nonsense that Trump spewed. Unfortunately, again, I'm going to give a credit to Hayat Vadim, who made a whole video about this. That's not what happened. There were a bunch of people in a shopping mall. A few of them, who were men, did not want to talk to Tim. The police were there, stopped them when it appeared like it was getting a little like, hey, we don't want to be interviewed in this shopping mall. You guys should just clear out. There was no real danger. And all the available evidence, including videos, which were not included in Tim's final product, make it very clear that none of it was true. The right, on the other hand, celebrates this video like you wouldn't believe. There are articles in Breitbart about it. There are articles in all the digital media publications at this time. Stormfront does a write-up of what happened. And this videos, this Last Night in Sweden video, in which nothing happened, gets Tim on the order, I think, of 2 million views. It is still one of his most popular YouTube videos. And suddenly, Tim has an entire new audience of people wanting to hear from him who just happen to be on the other side of the political aisle.
And he delivers, too. He's going to events. He's increasingly hobnobbing with far-right activists. In 2017, he's seen an event with the likes of James Alsop, Brittany Pettibone, Baked Alaska. A lot of these figures are, kind of has-beens at this point, but at the time were huge far-right influencers.
All white nationalists, I think it's important.
Just straight up, like no bones about it, white nationalists.
I also think if we're talking about Tim's psychology, and I really want to stress this, Tim went from someone who was in no way at all a public figure, doing, minimum wage jobs, bopping around, living with his brother, and suddenly he's a huge, famous, rich person. And then over the course of 3 years in digital media, he is shunned by his colleagues, loses those jobs, and now he's back to just being himself with a YouTube camera. What comes along is a way for him to return to fame. I think any half-decent psychologist would say that whether Tim consciously leaned into far-right politics as a result of this, or simply followed the YouTube clicks wherever it led him, it is very clear to see how and why someone's political belief system might change drastically when suddenly you have people like Brittany Pettibone, like Lauren Southern, like Lauren Chen, like Mike Cernovich, like Baked Alaska, like Sargon of Akkad, giving him the praise and the attention and the respect that he had been denied for the previous 3 years by people on the left.
Beanie on his head. He's not only like hobnobbing with these far-right figures, giving them airtime, sort of running apologia or sympathetic coverage of what they're doing. He's also using his bona fides picked up from the Occupy Day as a journalist to do advocacy journalism, which there's nothing inherently wrong with. But, he was part of a campaign to get It's Going Down, a sort of left anarchist, indie news site, banned from Patreon, the crowdfunding platform. Joining forces with Ian Miles Chong. He is requesting comment from Patreon after they suspended Lauren Southern. So he's using his bona fides to the degree that he is doing journalism, do it on behalf of advancing or inflaming these conflicts that far-right figures are facing against tech platforms. So I think at this point, 2017, it's pretty safe to say he is coming out as a full-fledged right-wing dude. He is still, I don't think, describing himself that way, but the train has left the station. Tim continues churning out culture war content on YouTube, and the themes become obvious. News media is fundamentally broken. It skews to the left, and his commentary is comparatively honest. He's a journalist when it's convenient. If he botches something, well, he's just a commentator. He figures out the algorithm for social media, and his channels take off. He talks very openly, especially in the early days, about appealing to those sorts of algorithms, his metrics, viewership numbers, and how the platform works. He's pulling big numbers and presumably some decent cash with it. He's casting doubt on criticisms of far-right figures, many of which he's friendly with, and aggressive towards the journalists who cover them. His star is rising, and rising fast. There's a utility to somebody like Poole in right-wing media. He's a convert. Like Dave Rubin or any of the other lefty-turned-friendly personalities, the conservative movement rewards him handsomely with access and influence.
So in 2019, Poole shows up on the Joe Rogan Experience as the kind of still kind of centrist image, right? I guess that was the image. Everybody who kind of was criticizing Poole on the left knew what he was at this point, but he's still kind of promoting himself as that and still sort of seen as that by the type of people who run Twitter. Vijaya Gotti and Jack Dorsey appear on the Joe Rogan Experience to kind of talk about this big issue of censorship and the idea that Twitter is censoring conservatives and censoring voices on the right. This was a big thing for Poole because he is kind of there to poke at the Twitter executives, if everybody recalls this, or if anybody recalls this. I definitely do. And at the end of it, can be heard on a hot mic talking to Vijaya, telling her that there are certain Antifa accounts that need to be taken down. This is sort of an extension of the activism he does to get rid of it's going down from Patreon.
Follow up on a couple of things because they worry me. You mentioned an Antifa account that docks policemen. Can you please just send that over to me?
bit.ly/Antifa tweet.
bit.ly/Antifa tweet. And then would you DM me? I'll follow you. Would you DM me the accounts that you said had threatened you?
No.
Why not?
I believe in minimizing harm.
Okay.
And if when Patreon...
I won't, how about this? I won't take action on them, but I want to understand why you didn't take action on them, and I can't learn from that unless you...
One thing about the Rogan Experience, Tim wanted to be on Rogan for a very, very, very long time. He has talked in videos about how he made entreaties to Joe about coming on, about how that it fell through at one point, and then Rogan stopped calling him. And then Poole does this thing. When Jack Dorsey appears on Rogan's show solo for the first time, Tim gets very vocal on Twitter about how, no, what Dorsey's saying is wrong. The censorship is right. Conservatives are being censored on Twitter is his big thing. And his main point of contention is that people can't dead name people. And that's how Twitter is taking a leftist perspective by barring people from referring to something aside from their gender preference, shows that Twitter is inescapably biased against the right. That was the bone that he had to pick. And he makes enough of a stink about this online that Rogan invites him on for this big episode with not just Dorsey, but the Twitter's then chief counsel, Vijaya Gotti, and Tim, who is seen as being there to sort of debunk the falsehoods that Jack Dorsey is saying is the amazing construct for this episode. This episode, though, is wildly popular. And the two appearances that Tim Poole makes on the Joe Rogan Show in 2019 are what really catapult him into conservative fame. Whether Tim knew that getting on Rogan would be a huge boost to his own subscribership and own earnings, or whether he just really cared about being seen by more people, who knows? Either way, it works like a charm. Tim's subscribership and audience skyrockets right after being on Rogan. This is where he starts to pick up the reputation, as he put it, of being a milquetoast fence sitter. This is what his fans started calling him in the YouTube comments, and he decided to reclaim it himself in order to take some of the sting out. And what Tim thinks being a milquetoast fence sitter is, he's not of the right, he's not of the left. He's seeing all sides of an issue and presenting them to people honestly and directly. He is doing true objective journalism. His fans have a very different definition of what a milquetoast fence sitter is. That's someone who is clearly on the side of right-wing authoritarianism, but constantly keeps throwing caveats in at the end. There's a wonderful video that you can watch by a YouTuber named Timba on Toast, in which he describes Tim's rhetorical style as he put it, shouting crazy person, whispering normal person, which is that Tim will spend the first 10, 15 minutes repeating every right-wing talking point he can think of, getting extremely heated and extremely angry, and then back up halfway and say, well, maybe I could be wrong about that. And maybe actually this isn't. Like, he spends one episode talking constantly about which is again something that Paul Joseph Watson brought up, is soy like feminizing men? And he goes,
this was a big thing in 2019.
Right.
There's like neo-Nazis also promoting that.
Right. So Tim decides he's going to give Paul Joseph Watson's views, which is that, yes, if you eat soy, you will be gay, a full airing. And he defends it and says how it makes sense. And then every couple of lines he throws in like, well, but there's this other study that I think I saw that said that wasn't true. But anyway, so that's what milquetoast fence sitting is for Tim. Loudly proclaiming right-wing misinformation and then giving himself the thinnest fig leaf of an excuse to say that he wasn't doing exactly that.
Well, the other stuff that he's doing at this time is also just taking things that are popular on the extreme far right and putting them forward in a way that sounds kind of ambivalent about them to give them a bigger audience. One example of that was this trend among racists and neo-Nazis to use clown memes, kind of they this thing where they used to use the phrase honk honk in reference to things as grotesque as terror attacks and stuff like that. They would put these like little like kind of baby pepes. What are those things called again, Jared? Do you remember?
I think I think those ones were technically Apu.
Honkler memes.
Yeah, Honkler, right. They would Honkler, where they would sort of put it like a little clown makeup on the Apu Pepe. And Jared wrote an article for Right Wing Watch, which was about this trend, and Poole did a ridiculous video that was just basically like, clowns are now racist, and just sort of making fun of the fact that this was an article and sort of trying to debunk it, while in reality just promoting the whole trend, promoting the clown Nazi trend.
Clowns are now racist. According to Right Wing Watch, white nationalists have adopted the clown as their latest symbol of racism. Anyone using the clown symbol is clearly a white nationalist, or they'd have you believe. But now we can expect media to start regurgitating these talking points, claiming that anybody using the clown symbol is a secret white nationalist or racist, because they don't seem to realize that memes are used by everyone.
Yeah, and this was my article, and as a early career journalist at that point, I took quite a bit of offense to how it was characterized at the time. Now I look back and I think it's funny, but at the time, what he tries to claim is that my article says that anybody who uses a clown meme is actually doing a secret dog whistle to neo-Nazis, which is not what the article said. And I will also note that the article is very clear about that. And he scrolls through the article, while he's talking about it, and there's a part where he stops scrolling. Hit me up in DMs if you want a link to this article, but there's a reason he stopped scrolling, because it would have undermined his whole video. But yeah, it's what you said. It's taking these like right-wing memes, this like 4chan culture, and then trying to essentially pour like a bottle of Listerine over it until it's sanitized enough for a broader audience.
Well, he knows that he knows that these folks that are creating these memes and the people who are in 4chan are the people most likely to watch his videos. And he also knows this. He sort of has an understanding of the sensibilities of liberal media, having been there before. So he is kind of marrying showing that stuff to his audience and this sort of attitude that cleanses him of being a part of any kind of white nationalist movement.
And this is a very valuable lane for him to get, because look, if you are in 2018, 2019, a person on the right wing, you're a Trump supporter, you can get your information from, say, at that point, like a Ben Shapiro or a Steven Crowder or any number of people who very clearly label themselves as being people on the right. On the other hand, there's a large chunk of a less informed audience who may not want to identify as full MAGA, but still shares these exact same sentiments. And if you read left-leaning press, people are telling you, well, this is racist dreck that you believe. And if you read the right-wing press, they're cheerleading for Trump. And neither of those are really in your lane. What he's looking for is a bunch of people who are looking for a way to codify their white nationalist beliefs in a way that seems palatable, coming from one of them, a person of the left, a person who's independent, a person who is a journalist. He makes his audience know that their beliefs are acceptable, not extremist, and in fact, valuable to have. And if you want to build an audience, picking that niche is very, very, very smart. Whether Tim did that on purpose or not, I don't know. But that's the niche he carved out.
So that kind of strategy, his appearance on Joe Rogan, all of this is setting him up to be this huge conservative media star in the Trump world. He becomes like a valued personality. And this is the point I feel like I would identify that 2018, 2019, where Tim Pool grows from a YouTuber yelling about news articles to building an empire, which today produces bafflingly some of the most popular podcast live content on YouTube and across platforms. In 2019, he goes to the White House Social Media Summit. Tim Pool, wearing the beanie, took a selfie there. Other figures like Carpe Diem, Ollie Alexander, these figures that would become certainly well more known in the following years surrounding the Capitol riot, they're all there. In 2019, he also launches Subverse, a news company. Bob, what is Subverse?
Tim still harbors the belief at this point that he wants to be a real newsboy. And one way to do that is to really have a media company that is not just him on YouTube, but to have a fully built out staff, people reporting things that are not him, doing real journalism, getting scoops. This is a big priority for Tim. So he makes this company called Subverse. He has to change it when it turns out that there's an erotic video game of the same name. And so they have to switch the name from Subverse to Scan.
Did you say erotic video game?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Just gonna let that go.
There was I believe, I think if I recall, that Subverse filed a copyright suit to stop Tim from calling it Subverse. In any case, he comes up with a different name. He calls it Scanner. But Tim does a fundraising round for this. And coming off of the Joe Rogan experience, he raises what was then a record for a media crowdfunding hit. He gets $1.1 million in crowdfunded income within 24 hours. Sean Lennon is an early donor to Tim Pool at this point. So he hires at first a handful of people. And this will become a running theme with Tim's employees. One of them is Rocco Castoro, who is someone who was advised at the same time as he was. He hires Rocco. Rocco is an experienced reporter. But the rest of his hires, they don't have lengthy resumes, let's say. They're just people who have fallen into Tim's circle for one reason or another. And the media company that Tim founds doesn't really put out that much work that catches fire in any way. It was sort of doomed to failure because he set it up as an independent company. It's not being put out on Tim's YouTube channel because obviously these people sort of who were working for him wanted to separate themselves to a certain degree from Tim's commentary. But unfortunately, they lost out on the steady stream of subscribers and YouTube viewers that Tim Pool's channel provides. So there are some interesting sort of long-form documentary video features that are shot. There are seeds of ideas, but it doesn't really go anywhere because Tim Pool has no idea how to run a media company any more than he had any idea how to be a reporter on the ground with Vice in 2014. He doesn't know how to lead it. He doesn't know how to edit anything. He has, to the best of my knowledge, written one article that was published by Newsweek in 2022. He doesn't write. I had one source advice say he doesn't even like reading any article that is longer than 600 words. And
unless he reads from it doing a YouTube video.
Right. And even then, you'll notice he pretty much just reads the headline.
So 2020, there's a lot happening in 2020, obviously, for everybody, for all of us. There's, of course, COVID-19 pandemic starts early then. He becomes a big anti-vaccine guy. And then there's also the sort of backlash that follows the killing of George Floyd, which happens in May of 2020.
Yes.
And that's a big one for the right. Yeah.
And it's during this time that Tim's opinions start to grow further and further to the right. Tim, at this point, by the way, now has fled.
I think that's just I mean, do you guys agree that this is also like a pretty big time in general for people who are already right to become further right? It seems like 2020 is like a huge marker in many ways. It's just like it just so many things happen. It's not just COVID, but also, like I said, the response to George Floyd.
Yeah, Tim does two things. One, he launches this show that became known as Timcast IRL. And what Timcast IRL is this live streaming show. It runs at 8:00. And initially, it's just him and one of his hires, his co-host by the name of Adam Kriegler, who he had known, who was a friend of his and he had known for many years. Also someone without any experience in reporting or commentary of any kind. He's just a guy. But he and Tim go on every night and talk about the news of the day. His co-host is also exceedingly interested in conspiracy theories, UFOs, things of that nature. But his co-host has said that being around Tim is what turned him into a Trump voter at that time. He was specifically red-pilled by Tim. Tim starts railing about how people are coming to get you. He says at one point that Antifa is going to come and hurt your grandmother and get you fired from your job. It's at this point that he starts plotting to leave suburban Philadelphia in New Jersey, where he was living at the time, and move further away because, as he put it, the Black Lives Matter protests were getting too dangerously close to him, and he had to get further away. One of his employees at the time said, on the record in a Daily Beast story by Will Sommer, that Tim was constantly afraid at this time that Antifa was going to come to him and do harm to his person. He was legitimately afraid that Antifa was going to kill him at this point. The presence of
stop you right there just to ask a question for the audience. We know him in largely, a lot of people know him now almost as this guy living out in where is it, Maryland, West Virginia. When does he make that move? Is he sort of plotting this at this point?
After he comes back from, just to give you a timeline, after he comes back from living in Miami, thanks to Fusion, he gets a place in I think it's either Jersey City or Hoboken or Union City, just over the bridge in Jersey. That proves for whatever he needs more space, and he moves all the way south, closer to the Pennsylvania border, closer to the Philly portion of Jersey. He is there. That's where he sets up the company. He is looking into properties to buy a studio. It's also worth noting that Tim already at this point is exceedingly rich. He was probably earning something around, by Tim's account, $400,000 to $500,000 a month in YouTube ad dollars alone in the fall of 2020. And he had pretty much no overhead costs at that point, except for this small media company that he was trying to build out. He is a very, 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 very wealthy person at this point. In the 2020, he was actually in a suburb of Philly, in Jersey, at an early version of the pool compound where he was working from then. He would decamp to Maryland shortly after that.
This is like the new Tim. This is sort of like the new Tim is kind of settling in. He's gone. There's a transition to becoming a sort of open right wing guy, and now he's kind of becoming a like extremely strident right wing guy.
Oh yeah, he says he decided to finally endorse Trump in the summer of 2020 for two reasons. The first reason was when Trump put out this policy platform for his second term, which was just vague generalities about making America great, and Tim reads it on air and says, that all makes sense to me. I'm a Trump voter now. At another point, he says it's in response to Kyle Rittenhouse is what finally convinced him to vote for Trump. But he is a full-on MAGA person. He is also acquiring more and more weapons at this time. He has complained at length about New Jersey's gun control laws. I would guess that one of the reasons behind moving away further and further into the boonies is there were less restrictions on the amount of weapons he could own. He has said on Twitter and on YouTube many times that he is, by this time, heavily, heavily armed.
Yeah, they even fantasize occasionally. There's a clip I'll play here of him and Cassandra Fairbanks, who was working for him at the time, fantasizing about using castle doctrine laws if somebody came to pay them a house visit. And a castle doctrine law, for those who don't know, is basically if you live like out in the middle of nowhere, it kind of varies state to state. If somebody shows up at your property, you're allowed to assume that you're in some kind of danger. And the premise behind these laws is that it would take so long for police to get out to you that you have a lot more liberty to take your self-defense or use of firearms or whatever it may be into your own hands. There's a lot more sort of legal leeway there.
So now we're in the middle of nowhere.
Yep.
Now here's the best part. If you come within if you come anywhere near my house, you're on my property.
Yeah.
In a castle doctrine state.
Same. I'm really out there. And the closest, my mailbox is a mile away from my house. I'm not kidding. An actual mile from my house. So, if anyone comes anywhere near me, I even thought about putting landmines in on my
You
street.
can't legally do that, can you?
I probably not.
The mice or the squirrels will blow up. No, the squirrels.
He's out as a Trump guy now. This is very evident with his live podcast, Tim IRL. He's hosting people like Jack Posobiec, who goes on something like 30 times in a 2-year period, 46 times in a 5-year period. Jack Murphy is on as a guest.
Jack Murphy often. 40 times in 2 years. 40. If anybody knows Jack Murphy, he was he was like a manosphere guy who kind of lost his career after people found out he was doing cuck stuff. And had made gay porn, I believe.
Yeah. At which point Poole shunned him and never had him on again. Jack Murphy, by the way, who had a men's group that he was trying to found called the Limnal Order, which was kind of obsessed with grip strength and the declining grip strength in men being a sign of the decline and fall of Western civilization. Jack Murphy was also a person who worked in education and got fired when it was revealed that he was his real name is John Goldman, and he was writing a blog, included lines, and here's a trigger warning, but I'm just going to say it. Feminists need rape was one of the lines in his blog, which caused him to lose his job in education.
Doesn't sound like someone who should continue to work in education anyway.
Who's to say?
So doing live content, we're also getting a lot more sort of unfiltered Tim out, and there's a few gems like this one from 2020 where Tim talks about his issues finding a woman to settle down with.
Right, which is nonsense.
No, of course.
But I do think it's crazy that I'm about to be 34 and I have no family. Because my dad had 2 kids by the time he was 27.
Yeah.
And I'm like, man, you know what the problem is, though? It's definitely not me.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's everybody else.
Yeah.
So cruising through the end of 2020, it's the post-election period. Election denialism is really taking off in the country. The Election Integrity Partnership, which was a nonpartisan research group that included folks from Stanford University, including our guest on the last show, University of Washington, DFR Lab, where I worked at the time. I didn't work on this project. They named Poole in a list of verified Twitter super spreaders who push disinformation on Twitter related to the 2020 election. At that time, he hosts people like Enrique Tarrio, who is leading the hate group, the Proud Boys at the time. He is pushing Civil War themes on his show, and he is raking in the money here. Just with super chats alone, which are, you can send a message in the live chat of the podcast, attach a dollar amount to it, and there's maybe a higher likelihood that the person hosting the stream sees it or responds to it live on air. Between October 2020 and November 2021, thanks to some research from ISD and sort of cross-reporting. Mike, you worked on this, right?
Yeah, I collaborated with ISD on it.
So
I reported off of their material.
He brings in nearly $250,000 through super chats alone, which resulted in something like $66,000 of revenue for YouTube. A Timcast IRL podcast in this period is averaging something like $2,000 per broadcast, which is a nice chunk of change.
It does not include all of the money he was making. I think just one thing I want to slip in about these January 6th broadcasts, the chat is, and the super chats in general that people are paying YouTube to make are like, we're going to go to the Capitol. We're going to raise hell. We're going to do violence, essentially, in so many words, or at least something that is obliquely like that. So he is in that kind of audience feedback loop that he's in, kind of drumming up like the anger that leads to what happens on January 6th. Not alone, of course. There's so many other influencers, but he's one of them.
Oh, there's a recording that I have, which is in my article, in which Tim is talking with his coworkers at Scanner or Subverse. And this is in September. And he's having a conversation with them. And they're sort of doing some game theory about what's going to happen if Trump loses, or what's going to happen if Trump loses, or Trump wins. What kind of sectarian violence should we expect? What will the Proud Boys do? What will Antifa do? Blah, 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 blah. And Tim says outright, I've gotten messages from people who say that if Trump loses, they are going to storm the inauguration. They're going to bring military gear. They're going to, in fact, try to sack the Capitol if Trump loses. He has that information. He says he's been receiving messages from people. He doesn't say who, but Tim at this point has a history already of converting on the sly with various far-right figures. He deletes a tweet that was critical of the Proud Boys because Tario DM'd him and told him to remove it because it made the Proud Boys look bad. So Tim is already in the process of whitewashing the violence to come. It's a very strange period where Tim is constantly talking about fear-mongering about what Antifa is going to do, what Antifa is going to do. And every far-right researcher and pretty much, reporter worth their salt is talking about the uptick in threats coming from the far right leading up to what would be January 6th. The day before that broadcast, Tim reads an article from NBC News warning about the violence that's going to come in 2 days, and Tim laughs at it. And he says, that's a joke. This is leftists trying to scare you. Nothing is going to happen. It's going to be fine. Meanwhile, 3 months before then, he is specifically on the record saying people are telling him that violence is coming. If you want to talk about the way Tim whitewashes his material to appeal to a far-right audience, I can't think of a better example than what happened on January 6th.
That's really fascinating. And I just want to say very briefly, wow, that is a huge turn from doing Occupy Wall Street 10 years earlier.
Yeah.
I mean, that's as far a turn as you can get.
Yes, Tim constantly. It's a meme now about Tim talking about civil war. And the amazing thing is, when a civil war happened, Tim did everything in his power to obfuscate that it was going to happen and lie to his audience about it, that it was going to happen. If you want to know about Tim Pool, honest journalist, well, does that sound like someone who's honest to you?
He was so honest and forthcoming that on January 6th, the day of the Capitol riot, Pool collapsed. Scanner, his independent news gathering arm. And, I don't know the exact reasons. For all I know, maybe he had been thinking about this for a year, but just throw that out there.
He collapsed it, by the way, while having two reporters at the Capitol taking footage. They were told by Pool that they should stop recording and return all this material.
That's crazy.
On January 6th, with reporters filming there live.
Fascinating. So by 2022, he is putting up billboards all over the place. He puts up, I know he puts up a bunch of them in New York City. What was the one he put around relative to libs of TikTok?
It was that Taylor Lorenz, he paid for a billboard in Times Square saying Taylor Lorenz doxed libs of TikTok, which is, of course, what tourists are dying to learn more about. I'm sure that's
so. The background of that is Taylor Lorenz wrote a story in Washington Post that identified that Chaya Raichik was the person behind libs of TikTok. Is that right?
Yes, it was a big deal on the far right. This was this is something that happens all the time now. Anytime anyone does any real reporting of someone who's posting far right content, particularly anonymously, and then someone reports out who they are and how they're connected to the far right money machine, for example, they just call it doxing. They call all reporting that the right doesn't like is now called doxing. And I think this was the first high profile example of that, which is Raichik and was operating under the cloak of the Libs of TikTok account. And Lorenz figured out, and Travis Brown, another researcher, did work on this, figured out that it was actually Chaya Raichik who was doing it. And they decided this was a horrible offense. And
meaning
invasion of privacy somehow.
So at the same time that this Libs of TikTok thing is happening, and he's getting a billboard about it and all that other stuff, he's running a website that is essentially an aggregation news site.
Yeah, there's no real report. The site has at this point just been folded into Timcast and become timcast.com. And these are the news articles that he's writing. There is, I read hundreds of his articles. There were a handful that contained less than half a dozen, maybe, that contained original reporting. The rest is just incredibly lazy aggregation, which, if you wanted to be a stickler about plagiarism, boy, does it cross the line a few times. And then there were at least half a dozen articles I found that were just straight plagiarized. And the amazing thing about these plagiarized articles that Tim Pool published is, while Tim Pool is still screaming about how the mainstream media is lying to you, they're cheating you, they're robbing you, Tim Pool constantly screams about the mainstream media that they're evil, they lie, they cheat, and they steal. And Tim Pool's writers were plagiarizing copy from the Washington Post, CNN, and similar mainstream outlets that are supposedly lying to you.
From the fake news directly.
Yeah, there you go. I mean, the site is a mess. He also, at that point, one of his bloggers, and credit where credit's due, she did the most extensive and she did the best version of aggregating, is Hannah Claire Brimelow, the daughter of prominent white nationalist Peter Brimelow. Hannah Claire Brimelow got this job, according to Tim Pool, because Cassandra Fairbanks recommended her for the job.
And for people who don't know who Cassandra Fairbanks is, Jared, do you want to tell people?
Yeah, we got into it briefly during the Jack Posobiec, Who the Hell is Jack Posobiec episode, but Cassandra Fairbanks is another person who kind of came up with Occupy, has a close relationship with, or did at one time with Julian Assange of WikiLeaks, would go on to work at Sputnik, a Russian state media operation, and sort of ping pong around, worked for Tim Pool, worked for the Gateway Pundit, ended up just becoming like a MAGA clickbait writer. She once fundraised money on the false pretense that Antifa or Black Lives Matter had shot up her home. I actually drove out to the neighborhood and talked to a bunch of people, and one of them directed me to a box of, a wrapper from a box of fireworks that had been set off on the night in question. Just very sus person, generally.
Very sus. Also owns some monkeys that she dresses up in diapers and little doll outfits. Bob, do you know is she still work for Tim? It seems like
Tim Pool disbanded his media company back in the fall.
Wow. You're telling me now for the first time.
Yeah, Tim Pool's media empire here is gone. I would like to add one thing, though. The reason that Tim Pool put up this aggregation site is because starting in I believe it's the fall of 2020, he started offering a subscriber service. And in order to get subscribers, paid subscribers, the minimum level, by the way, is $10 a month. Amazing. He needed to offer them something that isn't just his YouTube videos that are available to the public. So one of them is access to various subscriber-only news articles on the website. The other thing that he offers is after-hours Timcast IRL content, which he broadcasts first on Vimeo and then on Rumble, which is not going to be censored by YouTube. So if you want to hear various guests, and at this point, Tim has the likes of Alex Jones and Roger Stone on, and Steve Bannon, spew direct racist stuff or COVID denialism or election denialism. If you pay a monthly fee, you can get the real straight racist dope. And this is a wildly successful business venture for Tim Pool. He got, by his account, but I think he's telling the truth here, about 30,000 subscribers within a few months, and it's kept growing since then. I had a source tell me that shortly enough, it was about 50,000. When they left, it might have been 60. Do the math of people paying minimum tier $10 a month, even minus the processing fees. And this subscriber service, which is basically people paying for racism, was earning Tim Pool a revenue of about $6 million a year, in addition to everything he got from YouTube.
That's absolutely crazy. How much money has Tim Pool actually made in his YouTubing career? And how is that even possible? I guess this is sort of the question that I have. It seems like just a staggering amount of money. I mean, I don't know about you, Jared, but it just considering what he does, what he brings to the table, his looks, everything. I mean, nothing wrong with his looks. I'm just saying the guy is not exactly it's not it's not like Cillian Murphy or whatever. Like, he's not super charismatic. Like how could he make this much money? Like, and how much does he make?
It would be tough to calculate exactly how much. I know in 2019 and 2020, he was probably making from YouTube ad revenue plus super chats between $4 and $6 million a year. I asked Tim Pool about it directly when I went to him for questions, and he said, that's not the correct amount. And I said, is it more? Is it less? Could you clarify me how much it exactly is that you're making? And he declined to answer. But my back of the napkin math said about $6 million in 2019. He probably made another few million in the 2016 to 2019 years before he really took off. The YouTube revenue declined when he offered the subscriber service. Funnily enough, his YouTube views dropped. But again, the subscriber money sort of picked up from then. Even though he was now diverting some of that money to run the website and the media company, which he's gotten rid of now, by the way, that with paid ad reads, ballpark, I'm going to guess it's in the neighborhood of low end $20 million he's earned from this in revenue, not including expenses.
That's just staggering. That's staggering.
I mean, he owns multiple properties in West Virginia now. He is a serious landowner in West Virginia and gets invited and has been at various points invited to West Virginia GOP events because they see him clearly as a whale. How? I'll let Jared answer that. I have my theories, but if you want to take a shot, Jared, go for it.
In terms of how he makes all that money, I think a lot of it has to do with how guarded he has been about his sort of centrist image. He gave it up around the 2020 election and just started going full bore pro-Trump. And that's worked out well for him. I mean, I think the closer he gets to power, the more he can convince his audience that he is important and somebody that they should give money to. Something I also want to talk about before we get out of the podcast here is two things. One, his music, and then also the tenant media Russian proxy money stuff, which is kind of the last like big news coverage that Tim Pool got. In terms of the music, he collaborated with this anti-vaccine pop punk drummer and started putting out songs under Trash House Records. Tim was very big on the like anti-vaccine mandate kind of stuff, very popular right-wing talking point at the time. And it definitely, Bob, I think you were on it. We talked about it like many years ago, before the podcast went on hiatus and everything. And it's definitely music. He's making music, that's for sure. They sound like songs, I think is what you said. First big track he put out was called Only Ever Wanted. I'll play a clip of that real quick. The song sounds okay. I mean, I have some criticisms about it as somebody who also likes to write music and stuff. I think the idea of the first part just goes on for way too long before the breakdown at the end. You're just like left wanting. It's too easy around the like minute and a half mark to like zone out and move on. It just doesn't like evolve. It just kind of goes 0 to 100. But he goes on and he keeps releasing these songs, and without this becoming like an offshoot of the Pitchfork podcast or whatever. The only thing I really want to note is that like the production on a lot of these songs is definitely overdone, but that's kind of true of music everywhere anymore. But what strikes me about his music career is that somehow it just kind of goes downhill. I mean, this is just like my personal take, but this one, called Together Again, is easily, I think, the funniest one because it has Tim Pool using auto-tune. The melody's not bad, but the arrangement makes me feel like I took too much of my Adderall. And then the most recent one I could find was one called Hunger Inside. I'll play a clip of that in just a second.
No cliche unturned here. Gotta hit everyone.
But when I listen to it, all I can think about is being in like junior high school and listening to Cobra Starship. I get like a lot of those vibes, but it's like bad. I don't know how the music keeps going downhill, but it's just like it's like with every song, there's just more and more production, more and more processing, and the lyrics are just, it's just kind of nothing. It's like he has nothing to say, really. So I'll play a clip of that, and then let's move on to the Russia stuff. So in the interest of time, there's a lot of stuff that we're skipping over here in terms of what is happening on Tim IRL, his commentary, his podcast, his live stuff, his political relations. But the most recent big news hook that Tim got was his involvement with a company called Tenet Media. Tim was one of the sort of flagship personalities of Tenet Media, which was a sort of media collective that included people like Lauren Southern, Matt Christensen, roaming millennial, Lauren Chen, I think is her name. Benny Johnson. Benny Johnson.
Dave Rubin.
And according to prosecutors, dispersed the tune of millions of dollars to some of these right-wing content creators to license their content. So that means that they are not directly getting paid to make exclusive content, but they're just getting kicked these giant chunks of cash so that parts of their content can get re-uploaded onto another channel. The licensing agreement and all of that is not totally clear from the launch. I remember making fun of it at the time because the graphics had extremely poor Photoshop usage, where like people's eyeballs were like oversaturated to the point of changing colors and stuff. There's been a lot of news coverage of that. Basically, federal prosecutors in the U.S. claim they unraveled the scheme. They filed charges against a couple Russian nationals. They claim that Tenet Media and all the money it was relaying via Lauren Chen and her husband, who live in Nashville, out to people like Benny Johnson and Tim Pool, had been part of a Russian covert influence operation. Tim is believed to have received something like $100,000 a week, which is certainly no chump change, to license some of this content.
Jesus Christ, that's a lot of money.
Yeah, it went on for 8 months too. So do the math, how much you got from that.
This is a lot of money. A lot of money. Tim and a lot of the other personalities, I think, given the severity of the fact that DOJ was involved here with making these allegations, largely went silent. But to whose credit, Tim did speak a bit about his encounters with it. His attempts to, speak to where the money was supposedly coming from. It sounds like he just did not do due diligence here, really. A very half-assed due diligence is sort of the way I see it, especially with so much money on the line. But claims that, even to this day, that he operates one of the biggest podcasts. And, these are market rates. $100,000 a week to make content, to get content licensed, is not absurd for somebody like him. I did still have a few questions regarding the money. So I reached out to Tim via Twitter DM, and we'll read through some of the answers to some questions I asked him. On the question of when he found out that things weren't as they seemed, I figured maybe, since this was a federal investigation, that maybe he had gotten a tip-off at some earlier point. This is what he said.
There was never an instance that things seemed wrong. No one contacted us related to Tenet before that announcement. No evidence of wrongdoing has ever been produced. No evidence of anything alleged in the indictment has ever been presented.
I also asked him what share of his income came from Tenet Media, which was paying him $100,000 per week to license content. He said,
revenue from Tenet was inconsequential. It was a single non-exclusive licensing deal that allowed them to distribute only the portion of the Culture War podcast. Since then, the Culture War has grown, revenue has increased, and we are launching the Culture War live next month. Timcast and Timcast IRL consistently chart as two of the largest live shows in the country since the end of the deal. The Culture War has begun to chart in the top 10 largest streams as well.
Can I ask a question here? Is Tim saying now that the allegations he was paid by the Russians are not true?
We'll get to that because I asked a follow-up. On the question of whether he kept the money, which, to be clear, since they did not allege that he knowingly participated in this scheme, he was legally entitled to keep, or whether he considered donating that money to charity or another worthy cause, he said,
"There is no evidence that anything alleged is true. The Culture War contracted with a U.S. company for licensing rights on what is a top national live show at a market rate. As of today, there is no evidence of any wrongdoing, and we have no ability to operate to the contrary."
So I thought that was interesting. And like you noted, Bob, I was curious about this, sort of what I took away from it, which was this idea that Tim was saying that, or trying to cast doubt on what was claimed in this indictment, what the federal government is alleging was happening with Tenet Media. So I asked him to clarify, what would he consider proof of the allegations? Like, what would satisfy that want? And he said this.
"Yes, there is no evidence presented. The indictment includes out-of-context messages that are in dispute, no actual proof of said messages, in fact, and claims without any corroborating hard evidence for anything else. I have no information from anyone involved or any other influencer involved. As per finances, the amount we were paid by Tenet for a non-exclusive license to a podcast live stream, the amount was inconsequential to me and my company. Disclosing what I can in this regard, we have hired more people. We have begun a $150,000 park remodel. We are launching a new live stage show. Tenet had no impact in any way on operations, and the deal was minor and again inconsequential. The end of the deal changed nothing in my life, company, hiring, or plans. I think you're putting too much stock into claims from the DOJ that have never been adjudicated. I'm not sure why you would assume any of it de facto true," in quotes.
You mean no evidence aside from the PDF flyer that was sent to Dave Rubin when he started poking into where this money was coming from, that the money was being provided by a person named Edward Gregorian with two N's in Gregorian, who was supposedly fronting all this and doesn't exist? That no evidence? This is kind of amazing to me. Poole could have easily resorted here to something like, you know what? We thought we were entering into a legitimate business deal, but we were in the wrong and we were the victim here, as he initially said when the news broke out. But again, he resorts to these incredibly ludicrous lies. Like, okay, Tim, if you think that none of the information is true, I assume you are going to be challenging this in court somehow. The DOJ may have even defamed you by making this. Why are you not out on a soapbox screaming about how none of this is true and the Russians are not, in fact, paying you to scream at the top of your lungs about how Ukraine is America's enemy?
Also, if he's getting paid that amount of money, how could it possibly be inconsequential?
Well,
of course, of course, that money goes to something in his life and his business. Of course, it does. Even if it's inconsequential, focused around this particular show in one way or the other, in his mind, having that kind of money is consequential.
Well, if he had to actually admit to himself that this was coming from the Russians, maybe he might ask himself the question, why do the Russians want to license my content? As Tim and all these other people made clear, he wasn't really getting editorial direction about what to do. The Russians, according to the DOJ, Benjamin, just saw what Tim was putting out already and said, yeah, that works for us. So maybe, if I were guessing, I would say this very strange denial about the DOJ somehow fabricating this case against him has something to do with the fact that it might cause Tim to ask himself a handful of uncomfortable questions about where his politics lie and whose interests they really serve.
So that was kind of the most recent news hook. And again, listeners, we are confined by time. this could have been like an 8-hour podcast if we went through every single detail. I mean, we have like a document of show notes, and there's so much stuff we didn't get to, whether it is the debacle around his skate park, his family members claiming that he has changed and making, negative statements about his content these days, all the crazy stuff he said. There was this whole debate with a co-host and Jack Murphy, who we mentioned earlier, about why white people can't say the N-word. Just like so much stuff on the cutting room floor here. But in the interest of time, I think we should just zoom out here a bit. And Mike, I'm curious, after going through all of this for several hours at this point, I mean, what is your takeaway? Who the hell is Tim Pool?
Yeah, I think I'm going to disagree with at least Bob on this. I don't know about you and your take. I know that I don't think that Tim could have ever stayed doing left-leaning content. I don't think any amount of money would have surfaced for him doing that. I think as a narcissist, you are always pulled to the right, pulled by the algorithm to the right, pulled by the nature of internet content. And when you get big enough, that's what happens. And, in Pool's case, he has a tremendous amount of resentment for women and a tremendous amount of resentment for leftists. And I think that came from actual proximity to leftists early in his life. And I saved one quote that we didn't get to, which is during Waukesha, when there was a black man drove a car into a parade of people, a Christmas parade. Pool had Jack Posobiec on, and he said of the incident, which was not a terror attack, and the guy has actually turned out to be arguing from a sovereign citizen point of view when he defended himself in court. He said, "I think it's obvious. I think anybody who looks at the story says, in the absence of evidence, the solution with the least amount of assumptions tends to be correct. And that looks like a terror attack, a racial and political terror attack based upon what this guy has said and believed." And at that particular moment, racial tensions were very, very sensitive in this country. We were dealing with the continued fallout from the George Floyd backlash. And Pool was essentially baiting the most dead-eyed white supremacists in the country when he said that. And he knew it because he knows that audience. And I just point that out as somebody, there is no person who does that type of stuff who could have ever stayed doing left-wing commentary. I think this guy was born to bait white supremacists. And that is my take. And he's good at it. He's actually very, very good at it. And that is maybe the one talent he really has.
Bob, what say you? Who the hell is Tim Pool?
Tim Pool is the man who triggered himself and made millions. That's who Tim Pool is. The defining characteristic of Tim Pool's career, pre-YouTube, during YouTube, is that he's scared. And he figured out a way to turn that fear into a monetizable audience. As Tim Pool got more and more scared of the world, he moves from working in New York digital media to Jersey, to further out in Jersey, to Maryland, to the boondocks of West Virginia. As his content got more and more fearful of the Black Lives Matter movement, of women, of Muslims, of lesbian, gay, transgender, and queer people. We haven't even touched on the degree to which Tim Pool is a raging transphobe who said after the Q Club shooting, well, what did you expect would happen? Because of all this grooming that's going on, of course someone's going to shoot them. A number of Tim Pool fans, including the El Paso shooter, people like mass shooters have been revealed now to be watching Tim Pool's content. But what Tim figured out, the truest thing Tim has ever said on air, is that I'm just a guy who goes on the internet and talks about his feelings. That is 100% true. He is not capable of reporting. He's often not even capable of reading all the way through an entire article, as we've seen with the instance of Jared's Clown World story. But what he is capable of doing is seeing something online that makes him scared and figuring out a way to turn that into a 10 to 20 minute YouTube clip. It allows him to produce content at a massive scale, which is part of what got him so popular. He was recording 6 YouTube videos a day, 7 days a week in 2019. And that's what got him to the top of the YouTube algorithm. He is a person who, as he gets more and more scared, drifts further and further towards white nationalism and attracts a bigger and bigger audience. And now that the entire conservative party in America can pretty much be labeled a white nationalist movement, yeah, that's the kind of person who can thrive. And he does this. This is something that Becca Lewis, who's a disinfo and extremism researcher, told me in my story, which is that there are 2 types of YouTubers who succeed. The first are the performers, people who build a persona that is in some way entertaining, and you tune in because you like to watch this entertaining character. Alex Jones being the chief example of someone who has created a larger-than-life persona that people like to watch, despite the lies, despite the John Birch level gutter bigotry. Tim Pool does not craft a persona. Tim Pool on camera is really just Tim Pool. But he's able to succeed because he's something that Lewis called a mirror. What he does is he reflects his audience's fears and anger back to them. So when Tim Pool does a video about pretty much anything that's happening in the news, doesn't seem to understand it, reacts out of fear and anger, that's how his audience of young men, and I think in one text message that I got a hold of, he said his audience was something like 85% young men. That's what their response to the news is too. Tim Pool just gives them their fear in an easily digestible form. The fact that it's often proved to be nonsense, or it's something that he'll contradict a couple of days later, is irrelevant. Once he puts out that 10-minute clip, he's got them. What he's figured out how to do is take his own fear and failings as a person and craft it into something that is wildly profitable.
I think the only thing I have to add to what both of you have said is that what Tim Pool has become is not an accident. If you watch some of his early videos, he is extremely conscious of how social media works, how it can be gamed, how to be successful online. I would not be surprised if he is constantly poring over the metrics for his videos. There is almost no world where I can imagine that Tim Pool doesn't know exactly what he's doing. And he may genuinely hold these beliefs. I don't know. Who am I to say? It's his experience versus my take. But his political shift and the riches that he's reaped from it are as much a business strategy as they are a ideological shift. And I think it's important to note that, not to say that he is 100% pure grifter, but there's an element of grift here. Robert Silverman, thanks so much for posting through it on this marathon Who the Hell is Tim Pool episode.
Really, I learned a lot.
Bob, where can people find you and read your work? We'll put some of the links to your Tim Pool stories in the show description for listeners to go check out.
Well, you can find me on Blue Sky at robertsilverman.bsky.social. Is the easiest place to see where I'm posting these days. I'm also going to be doing an 8-hour one-man show about Tim Pool at the Cherry Lane Theater. So if you want to pick up tickets, it's like Spalding Gray, but for people who have a very, very, very bad case of brainworms. I think it's going to be a great show. But yeah, that's the best place to find me online. I've got some more reporting in the hopper that should be coming out soon on the world of extremism. And one thing I did want to add is like the reason why I grew so fascinated in what Tim Pool did is because I think it was sort of a strange hole in a lot of the press, which is that they saw this person. He wasn't, at the time that I started, a huge player in far-right media and far-right politics. To me, he seemed like the perfect avatar for the way in which social media platforms were gamifying hate and monetizing hate. And if he could succeed at this, the thing that terrified me is where all the other lost young boys were going to turn to, what was going to happen to all the boys who were tuning into him as a valid source of information. That's why I started reporting on someone who wasn't so well known at the time. And it's one of the many instances where I found myself thinking, boy, I wish I weren't right about this. But I was right about this.
So I'm not trying to be a dick right now, but like I've got 500 messages of like, what the fuck are you doing? Why are you taking the show down? Are you fucking with us? You're trying to make money.
So I thought YouTube took the show down.
No, I had to take the show down.
Okay.
I had to take the show down because you made 2 allusions within like the span of a couple minutes to murdering people.
Okay.
After I explicitly stated in the pre-show, do not make allusions to violence. Okay. Then went on to explain, we keep having people come here and saying they want people killed or people should kill people or they can be killed or things like that. 18 minutes into the show, you had made 2 allusions to, one was the helicopter thrown over the Pacific Ocean. That's kind of like a, fuck, we're going to get hit for that probably, but you know, we'll see what happens. But then you said you can go kill the humans.